With the recent release of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the historic Metal Gear Solid series is officially back in the modern age of gaming. With this new entry, there will no doubt be a ton of new fans looking to explore the history of the Metal Gear series. Many of its classic installments, Metal Gear 1 through OG MGS3, are now available on modern platforms via the Master Collection. But Metal Gear has always had quite the interesting and layered narrative from game to game, so I thought it would be a fun video idea to run through the whole franchise and explain the chronology of Metal Gear, and most importantly, how the story evolved in each sequel and prequel, and by the end we'll have a clear picture on how the story really works. I'll also explain how the series' evolution from a development perspective influenced what games got made, and when, and why, and I'll also explain how the various spin-offs fit into the picture. It's a perfect video for fans who want to hear about it for the first time, and long-time fans who want to trip down memory lane. Before we start, I'll go over some ground rules. But there are not many. Really, the first rule is just that some treat games directed by Hideo Kojima, the series creator, as the only canon games. I believe there are canon games that are not directed by Kojima. Not many, but we'll get to them when we get to them. I'll explain which games are canon and which games are not when we get to them. And second, I promise you that this video will not contain me going, "Wow, can you believe how impossibly crazy and hard to follow Metal Gear is?" I intend for this to be pretty straight-faced, so without further ado, we can begin our journey in 1987 with Metal Gear, released on the MSX2. When tasked with making an action game for the MSX2, it was pretty obvious to Hideo Kojima and the rest of the team responsible for making this game that the MSX2 wasn't really capable of running a high-octane action game. So it shifted into being a game where you need to avoid being seen and getting into combat. Metal Gear was a stealth action game. The story goes as follows. In the year 1995, a military nation called Outer Heaven emerges in South Africa. The West receives intelligence that a superweapon is being built at Outer Heaven. Special Forces Unit Foxhound, led by the legendary soldier Big Boss, sends their top agent Gray Fox to confirm the intel in Operation Intrude N312. However, Foxhound loses contact with Gray Fox. His last message was Metal Gear. In response, Big Boss plans a follow-up mission, and he assigns this mission to Solid Snake. Operation Intrude N313. Snake's mission is to rescue Gray Fox and find out about and destroy Metal Gear. Big Boss instructs Snake over the transceiver, giving him and the player advice on how to play and where to go and what to do. This was a game from 1987, so it wasn't particularly detailed. You had to figure out a lot of stuff on your own back then, but that's just how you made games back in the 80s. But Big Boss isn't the only help Snake gets on this mission. Snake makes contact with members of the local Outer Heaven resistance. Diane, who helps Snake on the weaknesses of the Outer Heaven mercenaries, Jennifer, whose brother is captured inside Outer Heaven and will only help Snake once he rescues enough POWs, and Kyle Schneider, who gives you input on the layout of Outer Heaven. The story is not a major part of the game, it's almost all about the gameplay. But having said that, I've always been fond of Metal Gear 1, provided you use a map to help navigate. It's not a perfect game by any means. In fact, it has a lot of problems and dated design, like how backtrack central the game can get due to things like, say, the elevators in Building 2 of Outer Heaven only going in one direction and you needing to run back and forth to go up and down, or needing to do cryptic shit like punch holes in walls to reveal secrets. But the game just has this arcadey simplicity to it that I've always just really enjoyed. It's got Metroidvania appeal in that you find secrets and use them to progress through areas you couldn't before. Along the way, Snake has to contend with the Outer Heaven mercenaries, the Shotmaker, Machine Gun Kid, Fire Trooper, Bloody Brad, and Dirty Duck. Each are meant to be fought in certain ways, but many can be easily beaten by standing next to them and shooting them a bunch of times. Others can only be tackled with a certain weapon, or in the case of Dirty Duck, can get your palms sweating because you could accidentally blast one of the hostages, which would decrease your rank by a whole star, decreasing your max ammo capacity. But still, it's not too daunting. Anyway, Snake gets captured and makes contact with Gray Fox early in his mission. Gray Fox confirms that Metal Gear is under development by the kidnapped scientist Dr. Madnar, and that Snake needs to make contact with him to find out how to destroy Metal Gear. Gray Fox is a pretty important character in the series, but that is his only role in the original game. You never see him again. Snake finds Dr. Madnar, but he won't talk until you rescue his daughter, who's also been captured in Outer Heaven. When you do that, Snake finds out that Metal Gear is a bipedal tank capable of nuclear destruction. Metal Gear, model TX-55 as it's called, can fire nukes to and from anywhere on the planet, and the leader of Outer Heaven wants it and it's almost complete. But it's not quite active yet, so the Doctor gives Snake the solution to destroy it. From that point on, Big Boss starts acting strangely. He gives Snake advice that leads to traps, and towards the very end of the game when Snake's approaching Metal Gear, Big Boss will tell you to shut off the game console. But Snake presses on and faces Metal Gear TX-55 and destroys it with plastic explosives. But then, Snake learns that the leader of Outer Heaven was none other than Big Boss. He sent a rookie on this mission in the hopes of sending false intelligence back to the West so that they wouldn't find out about Metal Gear's true capabilities. But Snake exceeded all expectations and destroyed Metal Gear. I must remind the longtime fans that later plot twists will be mentioned when we get to those games. I'm just telling the story how it was 40 years ago. Snake then kills Big Boss with rockets and escapes Outer Heaven just in time before the self-destruct sequence blows the place sky high. Snake is a little shaken up by the mission but returns home, while Big Boss is apparently still alive and plans to return. Take a good look, because that's as simple as the series will ever get, which already is more story than most games on the market at that time. It did its job well and was a great game by the standards of its time. And it begins our timeline in 1995, with Konami clearly seeing potential in the franchise. Metal Gear for the MSX2 was released in Japan and got a European port as well. US fans were not able to play the original Metal Gear until 2006, when a translated version of it and Metal Gear 2 were included alongside Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. In the West, Metal Gear was not a PC game, but instead a game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This was not a port of Metal Gear, but rather a new game based on the original. Many parts are the same, but there are also many changes, this game not being developed by Kojima and crew at all. It starts out with Snake outside Outer Heaven needing to sneak through the jungle to make it inside, but it is a lot more frustrating to play. To be honest with you, to this day, I've never beaten it. Like I said, you could squint your eyes and say it was the same game as the original, but I regard it as a separate thing. Like, it's an adaptation of Metal Gear, with changes that make it definitively non-canon to the series timeline. For example, Snake infiltrated Outer Heaven alone by swimming in the original. In the NES game, he and a few other people who are never seen again drop in by parachute. More importantly, Snake destroyed Metal Gear by himself. In the NES version, Snake destroys a supercomputer that's controlling Metal Gear. The mech itself is never seen, despite being on the front cover of the box. But Snake destroying it by hand is canon to the series lore, so the NES game is out. But if you ever wanted more story out of Metal Gear for the NES, this game actually got a novelization by Scholastic from the time when the game released. I haven't read it, but apparently it's not very good, but it is funny how on the cover of it, Snake's gun was airbrushed out. Either way, I just think Metal Gear on NES is a bad game. The Angry Video Game Nerd episode on it covering why pretty well. However, that doesn't mean it wasn't a successful title at the time. It was and got the job done, and thus a sequel came out a few years later, Snake's Revenge. This game was only released in the US and Europe but had nothing to do with the MSX original, purely a sequel to the NES game. 3 years after the NES Metal Gear, Foxhound receives word that a new Metal Gear might be under development, so Lieutenant Solid Snake and a squad of guys must investigate. This game is firmly non-canonical. Not saying that because I don't like the game, even though I really don't. I think it's even more annoying to play than the NES Metal Gear 1. But it's not canon because the Metal Gear series continued and the Japanese Metal Gear sequel was referenced in virtually every game afterwards, making it canon and this one not. Because there's room for only one Metal Gear and one Metal Gear 2. Remember, canon and quality are not the same thing. A game can be good and not canon, or bad and canon. Luckily, I don't think there are any bad canon Metal Gear games, but I'm just saying that Snake's Revenge being non-canon isn't an indictment on the game, just a fact. Though, Big Boss also comes back in this game as a cyborg, so it was already in B-movie territory. The back of the box is one of the funniest things, though. It gets the plot totally wrong. Apparently you aren't fighting Big Boss, but some nutcase called Colonel Vermin Katafi. I don't know, old video game boxes are just funny like that. But yeah, Kojima caught wind of this game's existence from one of his colleagues, which inspired him to want to direct his own Metal Gear sequel on the MSX2 and exclusively for Japan, until it got localized in 2006. And thus, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was born, the official sequel that is canon to the series timeline. Metal Gear 2 was the moment the series became a plot of political fiction, featuring real-world elements that the first Metal Gear never did. If you will allow me, we're going to spend the next minute or so on a really tiny tangent that pertains to the story of Metal Gear 2. MG2 takes place in the year 1999. Originally, this script had talked at length at this moment about the game taking place at the end of the decade, but the game claiming that the Cold War was still going on despite ending in real life in 1991, and how that was because the game came out before the Cold War ended. However, when I was looking into it, something didn't add up. I was looking at a fan translation of the original Japanese Metal Gear 2 on MSX, and it blatantly says, "It is the late 90s and the Cold War is over." And I was like, huh? That doesn't sound right. But then I checked back on my footage of the official translation, and it also says that it's the late 90s and the Cold War had thawed, meaning it was over. I was wondering why misinfo like that was in my brain, and then I remembered that I heard it in the Super Bunny Hop video on Metal Gear Solid 1, and treated that like it was a fact in my replays of Metal Gear 2. Even my most recent one for this video, despite the game blatantly not saying that. Not that I'm trying to make this a call out of a video from over 10 years ago from a person I don't know, because I have made more than my fair share of mistakes and gotten facts wrong or remembered things wrong in my videos. I'm just using it because it's contextually relevant. And besides all that, everything else he says would indicate that he's a lot smarter than me, but still, I figured I'd correct this tiny factoid about MG2 that some might remember incorrectly, since this is a lore video. And since this is arguably the most popular Metal Gear analysis on YouTube, I didn't see many comments correcting this fact. But anyway, let's now get into the plot of MG2. The Cold War is over, and all the world's nuclear weapons have been deactivated, and the world also faces a major energy crisis as petroleum resources are depleting across the globe. To combat this issue, Dr. Keo Marv invents a new formula called Oilix. But Dr. Marv is kidnapped by soldiers from Zanzibar Land, a new military nation that also houses stolen warheads from the nations that deactivated them. So now, Zanzibar Land threatens the world with nukes and also Oilix, the only hope of fixing the oil crisis. Snake retired from Foxhound after the Outer Heaven uprising, but has been called back into the line of duty by the new commander of Foxhound, Roy Campbell. So Snake is sent to infiltrate Zanzibar Land in Operation Intrude FO-14. Snake's mission is to rescue Dr. Keo Marv and shut down Zanzibar Land. Along the way, Snake will be aided by many allies in his transceiver. Colonel Campbell serves the role that Big Boss did during the Outer Heaven mission. But also, Snake can make contact with McDonnell Miller for survival advice, George Kassler will inform Snake on the mercenaries of Zanzibar, Johan Jacobson will inform Snake about wildlife, and the CIA has sent Holly White to infiltrate Zanzibar as well, posing as a journalist. She also aids Snake on the mission. Players of Metal Gear 2 will enjoy many improvements over the original game, like a radar to see enemies between screens and the ability to crawl underneath things to increase the complexity of the level design and stealth. But also new challenges are added, like floors that make noise when you step on them. Metal Gear 2 is a better game than Metal Gear 1, but it's certainly more taxing to play with challenging set pieces, some fair, some not, and has some things about it I don't like on the revisit. Like these Foxhound transition screens that can really kill the pace throughout the game, and how Snake can't shoot and run at the same time. Each blast stops you in your tracks. But still, the game is really great for the standards of its time. I just have replayed the first game more times. This is actually my first time playing Metal Gear 2 from front to back since I reviewed it in 2016. But back to the story, Snake has to fight with the Zanzibar mercenaries, the Running Man, the Red Blaster, the Four Horsemen, Jungle Evil, and Night Fright. All bosses offer more than any battle in the original game ever did, with strategies you need to engage with, like listening for Night Fright or leaving traps for the Running Man. One of the early bosses is the Black Ninja, a cyborg that battles Snake. Upon defeat, we learn that the ninja is Kyle Schneider from the first game. NATO bombed Outer Heaven after Snake destroyed Metal Gear and left many for dead. Big Boss apparently rescued many survivors, including the Resistance to Outer Heaven and the children who were there as well. Despite being a Resistance member, Schneider was thankful to Big Boss for the save, who is, in fact, back as the leader of Zanzibar Land. But Schneider doesn't feel any ill will towards Snake and points into the location of Dr. Marv before dying. To find Dr. Marv, Snake has to make contact with Dr. Madnar, who's also in Zanzibar, claiming to have been kidnapped again to work on Metal Gear D, the more complete and destructive follow-up to Metal Gear TX-55. Snake teams up with Madnar and his bodyguard Gustava Hefner to make it further into the facility. Here we get some backstory on Snake, or lack thereof. As Gustava goes into her past and love life, and Snake just reflects he doesn't have any family. Gustava's life is cut short as they're attacked by Metal Gear D and she's killed, and Madnar is taken hostage again. Metal Gear is piloted by none other than Gray Fox, who disappeared after the Outer Heaven mission, since Gray Fox is just loyal to Big Boss. It's now up to Snake to rescue both of the scientists and destroy Metal Gear. In yet another twist, Dr. Madnar was not a hostage, but instead willingly defected to Zanzibar Land. The scientific community rejected Madnar after the first game, and so he joined forces with Big Boss willingly. He also kills Dr. Marv in an attempt to find out the formula for Oilix. Snake shoots Madnar with a bunch of missiles, which takes him out, but somehow he survives that. But this leads to the finale, where Snake destroys Metal Gear D with grenades, but all his gear is destroyed in the explosion, and he has to fight hand-to-hand with Gray Fox in a room covered in mines. It was a big deal for Snake, given how much he looked up to Gray Fox when they were at Foxhound, and how he rescued the man in Outer Heaven, but now they're enemies by circumstance. Gray Fox was also the lover of Gustava that she mentioned being forcibly separated from, but he didn't know that when he killed her with Metal Gear, and never does find that out. Snake leaves Gray Fox for dead and finds Big Boss in the next room. Big Boss reveals that his ideology is about giving soldiers a place in the world, how many soldiers are tossed aside when their usefulness to the government has expired. Big Boss doesn't want that. He fans the flames of war with his military nations, which creates an endless supply of soldiers, and he will give them a home where they can do what they do best: battle. Only without the political actors deciding who and what they'll fight. Big Boss believes Snake is no different, but Snake is determined to prove Big Boss wrong and that he can overcome the nightmares he's suffered from for years by defeating his former mentor and escaping alive alongside Holly. Snake doesn't have any weapons though and creates a makeshift flamethrower and burns Big Boss to death. But I'm sure he'll be alright. After all, Snake was told in this game that Big Boss came back due to cybernetic enhancements. I don't think he'll stay dead. But that is a funny thing to consider when you take all the prequels in mind, that Big Boss, the greatest soldier ever who stopped World War III more times than you can count, was defeated by a makeshift flamethrower. But either way, Snake and Holly escape Zanzibar Land and make it home to celebrate Christmas in time with Colonel Campbell, ending Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake and continuing our timeline in 1999. This was a very ambitious sequel and still holds up in many ways. Metal Gear 1 invented the basic concept of Metal Gear, but Metal Gear 2 is when many of the conventions that the series would reuse in game after game begin. This game gave us the radar, crawling, a more in-depth storyline, plot twists, conspiracy, betrayal, and set pieces that any MGS1 fan would recognize, like a cyborg ninja, a battle with a hind, temperature-changing key items, and the list goes on. It's not the most amazing game you'll ever play in your life or anything, but a solid time. The Metal Gear series went on a bit of a hiatus after this, though. Not by design. Hideo Kojima made some other games in between the second and third entries, but the concept of a Metal Gear 3 started up in the mid-90s, but became more of a solid vision once the specs for Sony's PlayStation were released. A game set in a three-dimensional space was something that, to Kojima, allowed the team to do far more to really bring the stealth action concept to life. But the next Metal Gear game couldn't just be Metal Gear 3. It was a chronological sequel, but it needed a new identity since the intent behind this game was for it to have an international audience, and thus, in 1998, the world was given Metal Gear Solid. A name that, when looking at it, makes no sense, but just has a nice ring to it. Metal Gear as a name also makes no sense before you play the games, but the title had multiple meanings. It was Metal Gear making its leap to solid 3D graphics, and the series starred Solid Snake. The US cover having a lot of intrigue to it as it's just a white background with the red logo, oozing confidence right out of the gate. This was a major turning point of the series, the game where things really kicked off. So, what's the deal with it? Solid Snake retired from Foxhound yet again after the Zanzibar Land disturbance and moved to Alaska to escape it all. 6 years later, it's 2005, and Colonel Roy Campbell has pulled Snake back in for yet another mission. At the nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island, 6 members of Foxhound have gone rogue. Psycho Mantis, Vulcan Raven, Sniper Wolf, Decoy Octopus, Revolver Ocelot, and Liquid Snake. They've taken over the facility and threatened the White House, demanding that the government turn over the remains of Big Boss or else they'll launch a nuke. They've also taken the president of Arms Tech and the DARPA chief hostage. Snake doesn't want to come back, but Campbell makes him do it. His niece, Meryl, was a member of Foxhound and was stationed on Shadow Moses, and he's worried about her, so it's personal for him. Snake agrees to go to Shadow Moses Island, equipped with a bunch of nanomachines injected into him by Dr. Naomi Hunter, and that will help him on the mission. His assignment is to infiltrate the island, rescue the DARPA chief and the Arms Tech president, and find out if the group of villains can launch a nuke or not, and stop them if they do. Snake is once again guided on the codec by Campbell, Naomi, a tech specialist named Mei Ling, a weapons expert named Nastasha Romanenko, and McDonnell Miller once more. Obviously, MGS1 feels much different to play than the previous games with its fully 3D environments, but the name of the game is still familiar as you have to sneak past guards and obstacles to reach your targets. I've gone over my full thoughts on this game in a recent video, so I won't repeat that one too much, just focusing on the story for the timeline. And I'm also going to try and focus on the essentials, since the game has like a 1,000-page script. We can't go over everything, but to still make it a great resource on Metal Gear lore, I'll try my best to balance it all. Snake makes contact with the DARPA chief, who informs him that Metal Gear is back again. This time it's called Metal Gear Rex, developed by Arms Tech and was being tested at Shadow Moses, and the terrorists plan to use it, but that the override key can stop it. The DARPA chief dies of a heart attack out of nowhere as Snake makes contact with Meryl, who's a rookie but wants to help. Snake also finds the Arms Tech president being tortured by Revolver Ocelot, the right-hand man of Liquid. Snake saves the president, but he also dies of a heart attack after the Ocelot fight is interrupted by a cyborg ninja who is a returning Gray Fox looking to fight Snake to the death yet again. Snake also meets Dr. Hal Emmerich, who worked as the chief engineer on Metal Gear Rex. But when shown the true results of his work, he decides to help Snake on his mission to shut it down, going by the name Otacon. Snake does battle with each of the members of Foxhound as he explores Shadow Moses Island, a dangerous and isolated setting that gives players a sense of dread as you explore it. While that goes on, the major plot beats are as follows. Meryl is captured by Sniper Wolf, and Snake is as well a few minutes later. While captured, Snake learns that he and Liquid Snake are the last surviving sons of Big Boss. But the conversation is cut short and the player must survive Ocelot's torture. In the cell afterwards, we get an important cutscene. First, because Campbell is clearly lying to Snake about the mission and knew Metal Gear Rex existed and what it was capable of, and sent Snake here on false pretenses.
Come on, Colonel. Why don't you stop playing dumb? I'm sorry about Meryl, but I want the lies to end now.
What are you talking about?
Metal Gear was designed to launch a new type of nuclear warhead, wasn't it? You knew it all along, didn't you? Why did you try to hide it?
I'm sorry.
Can't tell the grunts, huh? You've changed a lot.
But also important because the rotting corpse of the DARPA chief is in the cell despite only having just died like an hour ago. But then more importantly, we get one of the first major retcons in the series, with regard to that Sons of Big Boss thing.
I don't have any family. No. Wait. There was a man who said he was my father.
Where is he?
Dead. By my own hand.
Big Boss.
What? Big Boss? I had no idea.
There was no way you could. It happened in Zanzibar 6 years ago. Only Snake and I know the real truth of what happened there.
So, is it true? Was Big Boss really your father?
That's what he said. That's all I know.
And you were able to kill him, knowing that?
Yup.
How?
He wanted it. Besides, some people just need killing.
That's patricide.
Yup.
Now, let me be clear. Retcons, short for retroactive continuity, are not bad things in and of themselves. Some retcons contradict previously established events to continue the story, and others just add more information to the saga to keep it going without outright contradicting anything. But here's the deal. Big Boss evidently told Snake that he was his son at some point. In no version or translation of Metal Gear or Metal Gear 2 does this ever happen. It could have happened off-screen, or maybe if MG2 was remade in the present day, there'd be some, "No, I am your father, Snake," scene. But that was not the intention back in 1990, so it wasn't in the game. This was added in the story of MGS1. However, Campbell did just say, "Only Snake and I know the real truth of what happened in Zanzibar." So, perhaps the events depicted in Metal Gear 2 are not how the Zanzibar mission actually went down. Perhaps Big Boss telling Snake about their familial relationship was redacted from the file or something. After all, the existence and origins of Solid Snake and Liquid Snake are top secret in series lore, as were many of the events of Big Boss's life prior to the events of MGS4. But another casual retcon in MGS1 is kinda addressed in the plot itself. The ArmsTech president tells Snake that the nuclear disarmament spoken of in the backstory of Metal Gear 2 was a total lie, and that the amount spent on this stuff is more than ever before. I figured I'd throw that in there when talking about new information. But with the help of Otacon, Snake escapes the cell and continues on his mission, also hoping to now rescue Meryl as well, whom he has feelings for, and also because she had such eagerness to be a soldier because of legendary heroes like him when he feels like she wasn't ready for a combat mission like this, so he feels guilty. Miller guiding him through that.
Snake, you can have regrets if you want to. It's only natural. But you can't keep attacking yourself for things that happened in the past. That road leads to madness. Believe me.
In this scene, Naomi is more suspicious than before since Miller calls out things that she says that don't add up.
Yes, he was Japanese, and he became a special undercover investigator to nab the mafia.
When was that?
Oh, sometime in the 50s, I guess.
Where?
New York, I think.
Naomi, I thought you didn't have any family.
Well, I researched it after I became an adopt.
But you don't focus on it for now. Instead, Snake battles Liquid in a Hind and then Sniper Wolf, who Otacon has a case of Stockholm Syndrome for. Scenes like this were the best proof of how cinematic games could become in the new 3D age. MGS1 has cutscene direction and voice acting that was galaxies ahead of virtually every other game on the market. The game captivating audiences with scenes of characters saying profound things that no other game was interested in dissecting before, leaving a lasting impression like no other. Sniper Wolf's death was one of the finest examples, being a tragic and cinematic moment as Snake listens to her story as she's about to die and follows through on her request to shoot her and set her free. The scene also having a sense of urgency and looming danger as Snake and Otacon continue working together in the third act.
I'm going to the underground base. We're out of time.
I know.
You'll have to protect yourself now. Don't trust anyone.
Yeah.
If I can't stop Metal Gear, this whole place will probably be bombed to hell.
Yeah.
We might not meet again.
I'll hang on to my codec. I want to keep helping.
Snake battles and defeats Vulcan Raven, who informs you that the DARPA chief that died in the cell was Decoy Octopus. The real DARPA chief died in the interrogation room with Ocelot, and around this time, Miller starts pointing the finger at Naomi by revealing all her various lies, which leads to her being caught and confessing some truths. Naomi was actually the brother of Gray Fox, aka Frank Yeager, and swore revenge against Snake for crippling him in Zanzibar. Gray Fox was brought back to life as a robot by a twisted doctor called Dr. Clark. And at the start of this mission, Naomi injected Snake with an experimental biological weapon called Fox Dye. It targets the specific genetic sequence of certain people by proximity and kills them via a heart attack. That's what happened to Decoy Octopus and the ArmsTech president. Fox Dye was set to kill all the targets the government wanted out, including the rogue Foxhound agents and the ArmsTech president. Snake just happened to kill Sniper Wolf and Vulcan Raven on his own without Fox Dye, but now that Liquid knows all about it, he added the vaccine to his demands. Naomi also altered Fox Dye to kill Snake as a way to get her revenge. And in the final act, it's revealed that Snake was being manipulated by not just his support team, but also the villains. Remember, Decoy Octopus, disguised as the DARPA chief, told Snake about the override key to shut down Rex. In truth, that was actually the activate key. The villains just couldn't figure out how to use it, so they tricked Snake into figuring it out and activating Rex for them. And to do that, while continuing to get info on Snake's mission, Liquid Snake disguised himself as Miller. One of the best twists in gaming, as it was right there in your face all along. You would have just never had a reason to suspect it, which is the perfect kind of twist.
Snake, that's not Master Miller.
Campbell, you're too late.
Master Miller's body was just discovered at his home. He's been dead for at least 3 days. I didn't know because my codec link with Master was cut off. But Mei Ling said his transmission signal was coming from inside the base.
So who is it?
Snake, you've been talking to...
Me, dear brother. Liquid, how the... You've served your purpose. You may die now.
Liquid reveals that he and Snake were clones of Big Boss created in 1972 in the Les Enfants Terribles project, an effort by the government to create more Big Bosses, the greatest soldier ever. Liquid hates Snake so much because he got Big Boss's dominant genes and Liquid got all the recessive ones. In the Metal Gear universe, dominant and recessive means good and bad, so Liquid believes he's inferior for having the recessive genes. Big Boss apparently even told him that. Snake killing Big Boss in the previous game robbed Liquid of the ability to do it himself.
You stole my chance for revenge! Now I'll finish the work that Father began. I will surpass him! I will destroy him!
You're just like Naomi.
Well, I'm not like you! Unlike you, I'm proud of the destiny that is encoded into my very genes! Yeah!
So now they battle as Liquid controls Metal Gear Rex and Snake tries to destroy it. But he can only do it with the help of Gray Fox, who reveals that he wants to die and only Snake can help him with that. And that he killed Naomi's parents and that's why he took her in as his own sister and was never able to fully face the guilt.
Tell her for me. Tell her that I was the one who did it.
And then destroys Rex's Ray Dome before being killed.
Snake, we're not tools of the government or anyone else. Fighting was the only thing I was good at. But at least I always fought for what I believed in. Snake, farewell.
Foolish man! He prayed for death, and it found him. You see, you can't protect anyone, not even yourself. Die!
Giving Snake the chance to destroy Rex once and for all, and has to fight to the death with Liquid on top of Rex's remains, in a fight to save Meryl and escape. Here's where things get interesting again. MGS1 has two endings: if you endure Ocelot's torture or if you give up. If you endure the whole thing, get an ending where Meryl is alive. If you give in, Ocelot's punishment for that is killing Meryl. In the bad ending, Snake and Otacon escape the island together. In the good ending, Otacon is willing to stay back and help Snake and Meryl escape in the face of certain doom. I don't think you can go wrong with either ending, though I personally prefer the Otacon one. I don't think Snake would give in to the torture. However, I think the chemistry that Snake and Otacon built throughout the story was more interesting to watch than Snake and Meryl, who got much less screen time in development, but either ending is good. The Meryl ending is the canon one because Meryl is a character in MGS4, and that means she lives at the end of MGS1 canonically. Although, in Metal Gear Solid 2, Snake is seen using both the stealth camouflage and the infinite ammo bandana. He got the former in the Otacon ending and the latter in the Meryl ending. They're even mentioned by name.
The stealth camo's busted. Landing impact.
We must have overused it.
If you run out of ammo, you can have mine.
You got enough?
Absolutely. Infinite ammo.
So, make of that what you will. Also, in the bad ending, it's revealed that Roy Campbell is Meryl's actual father. He's not her uncle. He was planning to tell her after the mission was over, but she dies and he tells Snake about it. But evidently he did tell her off-screen in the good ending because Meryl knows about it when she appears next in MGS4. In either ending, Liquid survives falling like 30 feet and chases Snake down but dies from fox die before he can shoot Snake, confirming that it will come for Snake at some point since he and Liquid have the same DNA. But Naomi just tells him that he should lead whatever life he wants to lead in the time he's got left. She can't take back her actions now, so that's all she can say or do. In return, Snake has this great moment where he decides to help Naomi overcome her own grief too with a little white lie.
He told me to tell you to forget about him and to go on with your own life.
Frankie said that?
Yeah. He also said he'll always love you.
The ending just has a feel-good vibe as Snake and Campbell make up and are friends again, and Snake rides off into the sunset with whatever character you see in the ending, free to choose his own path. The moral of the game being that genes have no factor in who you can be. Humans can choose the life they want and must live to do so. Snake went from depressed and alcoholic to a man with a new lease on life, ready to spread goodwill into the world. After the credits, we find out that Revolver Ocelot was not working with Liquid at all, but instead the President. Ocelot confirms to the President that Liquid went to the grave thinking he was the inferior one when it was really Solid Snake, reaffirming the theme that if Snake was the inferior one, his winning shows that the genes don't mean anything. Snake had the superior will. But it's also teased here that there weren't just two sons of Big Boss, but three. Solidus Snake is the third clone and is also the President. But that's the note MGS1 ends on. And what an ending it was. You can no doubt see how much the narrative has leaped in complexity since the MSX games, which are already some of the most complex stories in 8-bit gaming. As promised, I didn't cover everything, like the Jim Houseman conspiracy or what Ocelot was up to in MGS1. I'm just trying to stick to the big picture. It just so happens that a lot of the plot in this game is big picture. But regardless, it is the next game on the timeline and takes place in 2005. Metal Gear Solid was a very big deal when it came out. The PS1 had boatloads of iconic games released for it, but MGS1 was amongst that list. Overnight, it became one of the big Konami IPs ready to be used in a bunch of spin-off titles. MGS1 got re-released in Japan, and it was called Metal Gear Solid Integral, which added some of the features from the international version back into the Japanese original, with some new stuff like expanded VR missions. Those weren't in America, so they got released here as Metal Gear Solid VR Missions. I haven't played a lot of this game, just dabbling in it for footage in my ancient original review of MGS1, but VR Missions is interesting in the sense that it doesn't have a storyline, so it's not canon in the way where it would get a spot in the timeline. But I said it was interesting because VR Missions is canon to the series in the sense that Metal Gear Solid VR Missions is a game inside the Metal Gear universe. In MGS2, Raiden tells Snake that he was trained in VR.
I've had extensive training, the kind that's indistinguishable from the real thing.
Like what?
Sneaking mission 60, weapons 80, advanced
VR, huh?
but realistic in every way.
Those were missions in MGS VR Missions. Footage of the game is playing, meaning that Raiden has played Metal Gear Solid VR Missions and that the armed forces in-universe use this game as training. So that's something worth considering. The next Metal Gear game released was called Metal Gear Ghost Babel and was released for the Game Boy Color. In the US, it was just called Metal Gear Solid, but most people just call it Ghost Babel for simplicity's sake. I've never played this game for more than a few minutes, but the basic rundown is that 7 years after Snake destroyed Metal Gear TX-55, a new Metal Gear is being constructed at the remains of Outer Heaven, and Snake is pulled out of retirement to explore the facility again and shut it down. The game harkens back to the gameplay of the 2D games, and I've heard it's good, but I just never played it. The game is not canonical to the series' timeline, and I'm sure attentive viewers can tell you why. Because it's Snake's first mission after Outer Heaven, 7 years later, placing the game in the timeline's 2002. But we know that Snake was in Zanzibar in 1999, and he was out of action from then to 2005. Metal Gear Solid treats Metal Gear 2 as canon, Metal Gear Solid 2 treats MGS1 as canon, therefore the game contradicting the lore is Ghost Babel, and therefore is not canon. It's a what if, an alternate timeline sprung off from the events of the first Metal Gear. But remember, canon and quality are not the same thing. The game's story can still be good, even if it didn't happen in the main timeline. But speaking of which, we can now return to that. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty was one of the most anticipated games of its generation, being one of many amazing titles to usher in the PlayStation 2 era. The gameplay and graphics between MGS1 and MGS2 were night and day. The visuals, the effects, the action scenes, the interactive elements, the gunplay, it was all so refined and improved from Metal Gear Solid 1. Back when game console upgrades really produced a significant leap in gameplay quality. MGS2 is about as good a demonstration of that as you could get. But how does the plot connect to the rest of the series? Well, 2 years after the Shadow Moses incident, Solid Snake and Otacon are working together as part of an anti-Metal Gear NGO. The technical specs of Metal Gear Rex were sold on the black market by Ocelot after MGS1, so Snake and Otacon devote their lives to destroying Metal Gear whenever and wherever it pops up. They had classified intelligence that a new kind of Metal Gear was being transported on a tanker by the US Marine Corps. Snake infiltrates the ship to find proof of Metal Gear Ray's existence so that they can leak it online. But the ship is quickly raided by Russian soldiers led by Colonel Sergei Grlukovich, one of Ocelot's off-screen allies in MGS1. So, armed with nothing but a tranq gun, Snake has to avoid the Russian forces and get proof of MG Ray. On the way, he meets Olga Grlukovich, the Colonel's pregnant daughter, and makes his way to the holds, where Ray is. Snake witnesses Ocelot turn on the Russian forces, killing Grlukovich and Marine Commander Scott Dolph as he uses Semtex to blow the tanker to the bottom of the Hudson River. Snake tries to stop Ocelot, but that causes Liquid Snake's personality to take over Ocelot's body. See, Ocelot lost his hand in MGS1 and now has Liquid's hand grafted onto his body, and being near Snake causes Liquid to take over Ocelot, voice and all.
It's been a while, brother.
Who are you?
You know who I am.
Liquid?
Our raw materials are vintage, brother. Big Boss was in his late 50s when they created his copies. But I live on through this arm!
Liquid's on.
In this scene, it's revealed that Ocelot wasn't working for the Russians or Solidus, he was working for the Patriots, aka the Lalilulelo. But no further elaboration is given in this scene. Liquid Ocelot takes over Metal Gear Ray and escapes, leaving Snake for dead. Ocelot confirms to Solidus Snake that photos of Solid Snake were taken on the scene, setting up for a larger plan, ending the tanker prologue of MGS2, which no doubt left players in 2001 scratching their heads, because the entire marketing campaign of MGS2 revolved around Snake on a boat. That's because MGS2 houses one of the biggest marketing secrets in gaming history. You only play as Snake in the intro of MGS2, but spend the rest of the game in a new chapter that deals with the fallout of the tanker incident which took place in 2007. 2 years later, the story picks up again as we hear the voice of Colonel Roy Campbell instructing someone with the codename Snake. After the tanker blew up, it threatened to cause an environmental catastrophe, so an offshore cleanup facility called the Big Shell was created to stop the spread. President James Johnson was taking a tour of the facility when the terrorist unit Dead Cell took over the facility and captured the president. The terrorists demand that the government give them $30 billion or else they'll kill the hostages and blow up the Big Shell, causing an environmental incident that will infect the bay for centuries. Dead Cell consists of a woman who can't be hit by a bullet named Fortune, a vampire-like man named Vamp, a mad bomber named Fat Man, Revolver Ocelot, and ex-president George Sears, aka Solidus Snake, as their leader. The new Snake you're playing as is a rookie at Foxhound and is given the new name Raiden. Raiden is guided by the Colonel and his girlfriend Rose, who works as a specialist for this mission. But for the early game, that's it as far as radio help is concerned. Raiden's mission is to rescue the president and stop the terrorists in the event SEAL Team 10 can't get the job done. But they're quickly decimated by Fortune and Vamp, and the president is taken deeper into the facility. One member of the SEALs survived, Iroquois Pliskin. But this is obviously Solid Snake in disguise, building intrigue into what is going on because Snake and Raiden meet the bomb disposal expert Peter Stillman, who says that a skinny guy with glasses got in alongside the SEALs, and that's Otacon. So Snake and Otacon are here up to something, but we're now witnessing their exploits from the eyes of Raiden, whose deal is that he's a VR-trained rookie out of his depth on his first field mission against these freaky supervillains.
Who are they? Dead Cell, I mean. They couldn't hit her no matter how hard they tried. And that vampire, too, it's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from.
Jack, snap out of it.
And you, Rose, I can't believe you're on this mission. I keep thinking I'll wake up.
Raiden, this is real. And that's why you won't wake up.
But nothing seems real.
I've made up my mind to stay with you. Whether this is real or a bad dream, I'll keep watching you till it's over.
Thank you, Rose. And I won't let you be just a dream.
Are you two done? Raiden, you're needed on Strut C.
Also creating intrigue because this colonel seems really detached compared to the one we knew, and because Raiden claims he's a Foxhound agent, but Snake informs him that Foxhound was disbanded, so that should clue us in that we have no idea who this guy is actually and what he's doing here, and neither does he. Raiden and Snake split up to take care of the bombs in the big shell, which leads Raiden to face Fortune, who's out to kill Solid Snake because she believes he killed her father on the tanker, even though it was Ocelot. Raiden escapes and kills Fat Man, preventing the big shell from blowing up, as a cyborg ninja calling himself Mr. X tells him to rescue Ames in the Shell 1 core to find out where the president is. Ames tells Raiden that the terrorist plot was not a demand for ransom money and that Solidus is trying to launch a nuke, and that both he and Raiden are working for the Lolly Lo, to the confusion of Raiden. But Ames dies from what looks like a heart attack as the cyborg ninja jumps in to help Raiden escape from Ocelot. Raiden makes his way to the president but is attacked by Solidus, who also reveals himself to Snake.
So you're the boss around here?
No, not just around here. I'm the boss to surpass Big Boss himself. Solid Snake.
No, that is not Solid Snake.
What a pleasant surprise, brother.
Save it. You brother of mine.
Don't say you've forgotten me, Snake.
Snake?
Right, take cover. Stop impersonating him.
I'm a whole different game from Liquid.
And you know, one thing I always wondered about the story of this game was that Solidus Snake is considered the perfect clone of Big Boss, an exact match for the man. And I have to wonder if that ever came up in his presidential campaign or term as president. Like, I wonder if any journalist ever asked, Mr. President, you bear a striking resemblance to famous soldier Big Boss, whose face is plastered all over military recruitment propaganda. Care to comment on this? I'm sure the Patriots would suppress all that, but I thought it was a funny thing to mention. Snake and Otacon explain their whole situation to Raiden and how Snake faked his death by tossing Liquid's body into the river. Their DNA is the same after all. Something foreshadowed earlier since Rose told Raiden that Snake's body was ID'd in the river but it was missing an arm, which might make you think it was Liquid's since we already saw Ocelot has Liquid's right arm on his body. Raiden presses on and meets the president, who tells him the whole scary picture. And I just subconsciously referenced Sly 4 in a script and the voiceover. What's the world coming to? Anyway, the United States government is a ruse, an elaborate theater put up by the organization that truly runs the country, the Patriots. A secret organization that has existed for decades and controls everything from politics to culture. They decide everything and know everything. The president wasn't actually captured by Dead Cell. He joined willingly and was going to help Solidus fire a nuke, but he thought it was a threat. He wanted to join the Patriots and gain their power. He wanted authority for real, not the fake power he has as president. What Solidus actually wants is to go scorched earth, so he's offering info to Raiden, including that the big shell is a front for the development of a new type of Metal Gear called Arsenal Gear. A giant battleship being made right underneath the big shell, which was never a cleanup facility at all. Ocelot shoots the president and leaves. Snake and Otacon confirm that the intel is correct, the big shell is fake, and that they're here to stop Arsenal Gear.
You knew about Arsenal Gear?
Yeah,
Why didn't you tell me about it?
you never asked.
Am I correct in assuming you also know that the big shell's a front for the project?
You mean, did I know that the Big Shell, a fully functional environmental cleanup facility, was designed to camouflage Arsenal Gear? Yeah, I did. It's exactly what the President and Ames described, a massive cover story.
They went underground because the Patriots didn't intend for Solid Snake to be a world-renowned hero shutting down Metal Gears. So the whole tanker incident was a setup to frame and smear Snake.
Photos of Snake, taken by the Cypher, were released to the public. In turn, we became the world's most wanted environmental terrorists.
It was definitely a move aimed at putting a stop to our anti-Metal Gear activities.
But why did they choose Snake?
Since the Shadow Moses incident, Snake became sort of a hero. I think the Patriots weren't too happy about that.
You knew about the Patriots?
Well, yes, to a certain degree.
It seems like everyone knows about them except me.
They didn't choose Snake to be a hero.
So they decided to do a smear campaign.
I think the Patriots wanted to make an example of him so everybody would think twice before opposing them.
But that didn't stop Snake and Otacon from continuing their anti-Metal Gear activities, as seen by their still being here fighting. Snake carrying on the words of Gray Fox.
I'm here because I was assigned to this mission, not because I want to. If I could, I'd be out of here in a second. How could you come back to all this? Why keep fighting?
There's something my best friend said to me once.
What?
We're not tools of the government or anyone else. Fighting was the only thing I was good at, but at least I always fought for what I believed in.
At this point in the story, Snake and Otacon are the only ones providing any relief to Raiden, as he's otherwise alone in this hellish mission. The Colonel is inexplicably an asshole, and his relationship with Rose is on shaky ground, so they're no help at all. His next mission is to track down Otacon's sister, Emma Emmerich, who is the lead AI programmer for Arsenal Gear, as she has the program to shut it all down. On the way, Raiden fights Vamp and learns from Emma all about the Patriots and their manipulation of information via the internet and AI. Like how the Human Genome Project allegedly revealed that 40,000 genes were in the human body, but apparently it was 100,000 and the other 60 were suppressed by the Patriots. The fake science became canon and nobody questions it. Effective commentary on the nature of mis and disinfo spreading on the internet, something my recent MGS2 video went into in more depth. Besides that, Raiden gets to know all kinds of messed up stuff about the Emmerich family. Like how Otacon's father died via drowning in the pool, which is an event that traumatized Emma into never swimming. And that the reason his father did that is that Otacon had a physical relationship with his stepmother, which drove his father over the edge. Snake and Raiden are just trying to do the job, but they gotta listen to all that. But anyway, Raiden provides cover fire for Emma as she crosses the bridge on the water to get back to Shell 1, but Vamp mortally wounds her before being blasted into the water. Emma doesn't make it and her virus stops at 90%, so the heroes need to raid Arsenal Gear to stop Solidus. Not before Snake proves himself as a legendary best friend by comforting Otacon after the death of his sister.
Damn! Otacon, try to get as many hostages out as you can. It's a short flight to the shore, so don't worry about overloading the Kamov.
Leave it to me.
I repeat, personnel in the upper levels, head for the evacuation area immediately.
I'm counting on you, Otacon.
He then uses Raiden as bait to gain access to Arsenal Gear. Here we get some truth bombs. Solidus recognizes Raiden, and that's because he was once leading a squad of child soldiers in the Liberian Civil War. Raiden was one of them and was by far the best killer in the whole platoon, earning him the name Jack the Ripper, bringing Raiden's horrible childhood back to the forefront of his mind. The life he's tried so hard to forget, and admits it all to Rose, who he has tried to hide it all from under the guise of a personality-free person. Raiden escapes and is assaulted by the Colonel and Rose, saying a series of bizarre things, including a callback to Metal Gear 1 where the Colonel says to shut the game off.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
Raiden, something happened to me last Thursday when I was driving home. I had a couple of miles to go. I looked up and saw a glowing orange object in the sky, to the east. It was moving very irregularly. Suddenly, there was intense light all around me, and when I came to, I was home. What do you think happened to me?
Huh?
Fine. Forget it. Honestly, though, you have played the game for a long time. Don't you have anything else to do with your time?
Raiden is also called by Rose, who says that she was sent by the Patriots to be his ideal girlfriend so they could keep tabs on him. But then she did really have feelings for him later on. But then the conversation ends with a glitchy transmission of her saying she's pregnant. Raiden meets up with Snake, and they learn that the Colonel's signal is coming from Arsenal Gear. The Colonel is not real, but an AI. He's been talking to an AI for the entire game, one created by the Patriots to manipulate Raiden. But all that aside, Snake and Raiden need to take down Solidus before he can hijack Arsenal and take NYC off the grid, removing the city from the Patriots' control so he can begin his resistance to the Patriots. But Raiden has to fight an army of production model Metal Gear Rays alone as Snake fights Fortune, which leads to them both getting captured. And the death of Olga, who was Mr. X all along. Her child's life depended on her helping Raiden. The Patriots are going to kill the kid if she didn't help Raiden. And some even more truths are revealed. Solidus explains to Raiden that he's been a part of a Patriot plan called the Solid Snake Simulator, where the Patriots wanted to recreate Solid Snake. Ocelot later confirming that many details of the Big Shell incident lined up with the Shadow Moses incident was a part of the plan to see if they could remake Snake. To get down to brass tacks, Liquid then takes over Ocelot's body, tries to kill everyone, and is off to destroy the Patriots himself. Snake escapes and chases after him. Arsenal crashes into Federal Hall, and that leads to the final battle between Raiden and Solidus, but not before the Patriot AI hops on the call one last time to tell Raiden that S3 was not about recreating Snake. It was called the Selection for Societal Sanity. They believed humans aren't smart enough to control their own lives and preserve their own culture, so the Patriots weed through the info, delete what they don't think is good, and preserve what they do. And this mission was to see if they could control outcomes by making Shadow Moses happen again. While Snake and Raiden maintain that humans having the ability to decide for themselves what to pass on is an integral part of the human experience. It's a scene with a lot going on, to say the absolute least. I had some thoughts, some good, some not so good, and many others in my recent MGS2 video, but I'm just focusing on the lore today. Raiden is in a lose-lose position because he wants to reject the Patriots but can't because Olga's child will die if he doesn't defeat Solidus, but then Solidus will kill him to find out where the Patriots are, so he has to fight to stay alive and do what the Patriots demand at the same time. But Solidus is defeated and Raiden is left puzzled about what to do with himself after having spent so much of his life being manipulated, now by AI overlords too. Snake assures him that every feeling he had in this mission was real and that he's allowed to pick whatever life he wants, starting with meeting Rose and preparing for their future together, while Snake and Otacon set out to find Liquid, Ocelot, and the Patriots, ending Metal Gear Solid 2, which can neatly be plotted onto the timeline, taking place in 2007 in the intro and 2009 for the bulk of it. This game was another giant leap in complexity from MGS1. You better believe a lot of stuff got left out of that summation, but once the Patriot train leaves the station, there's no stopping it. The conspiracy of the Patriots is then what the entire series revolves around going forward, and it recontextualizes previous games, because the Patriots were there the whole time controlling events, as was Ocelot behind the scenes scheming as well, including the 8-bit games where none of that was seemingly a factor. But MGS2 proved divisive when it came out. The game got raving reviews and is to this day the best-selling Metal Gear game. However, fans were divided on the Raiden switch and were split on his character and the game's pivot to digital censorship and AI overlords. It just wasn't as topical in 2001 as it is today. So the game has aged well in that sense. People have come around in this game a lot. When it came out in HD in 2011, people got the chance to replay and reevaluate it once the shock wore off, and could see the game for what it was, and the narrative around it started to shift towards it being a misunderstood masterpiece. But speaking of re-releases, MGS2 had one. It was called MGS2 Substance, which added a lot of new modes and missions. This is what the HD edition of MGS2 is based off of. That HD edition is the one included in the Master Collection. MGS2's gameplay was pretty well received, and its sales couldn't be denied, so the next Metal Gear game capitalized on both. Nintendo wanted a piece of the Metal Gear pie again, so Kojima was in talks with Iwata and Miyamoto about what could be done to bring Metal Gear to Nintendo's GameCube. The answer was not to give them Metal Gear Solid 3, because that was in development on PS2 with Kojima's team, but he instead suggested an MGS2-styled remake of MGS1 on the GameCube developed by Silicon Knights. Thus, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes was born. I won't focus on it too much because it is what it sounds like. It is MGS1 with the gameplay of MGS2. I covered it in depth in my recent MGS1 video, and so I'll sum it up with this. Twin Snakes is a really fun game, and I think it's more fun than MGS1, however it has rightfully gotten flack for being too easy and broken and stripping the game of the atmosphere that made MGS1 great to play. The redubbed cutscenes don't sound as good, the music isn't a fraction as iconic as the PS1 game, and the action-heavy cutscenes, while stellar on their own, don't mesh super well with MGS1's story. But I think the remake is a solid time. I'm especially glad I got it on Amazon with the box and manual back in 2016 for only like $60. Of course, at the time, that was all the money I could muster because I was 15, but still. That's a steal compared to what the game is worth now, because the game was never re-released. Though, with the Master Collection Volume 2 on the way, you never know. The Twin Snakes doesn't have a lot of bearing on the canon discussion. It's the same story as MGS1 with a nearly identical script, just some light changes here and there. Some theorize that MGS Twin Snakes is the VR simulation of Shadow Moses that Raiden did, and that the PS1 game is the real events, because the Twin Snakes is such a souped up version it seems natural to be the game adaptation. But I have heard compelling evidence that it could actually be the other way around, given how Snake says this about the PSG-1 rifle in MGS2.
Although you've probably fired a few rounds in VR training, there are a few differences in handling the rifle you should be aware of. First, that the PSG-1 is equipped with a special magnification adjustable scope. For precision shooting, it allows you to zoom in on your target, and for wide range viewing, all you have to do is zoom out. Another difference is that you aren't limited to firing from the prone position. In short, you can fire from a crouching or standing position.
That lines up with how the PSG-1 functions in Twin Snakes as real life and MGS1 as VR. But I won't get too into the details on that, make of that what you will yet again. Another thing is that Twin Snakes got rid of the accents for Naomi and Mei Ling. MGS4 also didn't give those characters accents, and flashback audio of MGS1 in MGS4 used the Twin Snakes recordings. Another bit of evidence may be pointing at this being canon over the original, but I'm just gonna stick with the original since it is the original work that was referenced with footage in MGS2 and even 4. But that's about it for this game. The divisiveness of MGS2 no doubt had a factor in the direction the next game went in. Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater. This is when the timeline begins to move around because it's the first prequel in series history, taking place 31 years before the first Metal Gear. This time, the gameplay was going to be very different than the previous games. You wouldn't play as an operative sneaking through a singular base, but rather an operative surviving in the jungle on a dangerous mission. So, all very new territory for the franchise. The story naturally felt fresh after how insane the plot of MGS2 got at the end. So far, the series has spent a lot of time on Big Boss before, being the villain for 2 games. And the effect he had still being a prominent element of the other 2 games. But we didn't know a lot about Big Boss as a person. MGS3 set out to change that. Well, before this, guidebooks and other things explained who Big Boss was, but never did any game go into it. MGS3, being a game in this video game series, takes precedent and marks any other external media backstory non-canonical if it contradicts the game. MGS3 takes place in 1964, as the Fox unit has been given its first major assignment. The Cold War rages on, and a Soviet scientist named Sokolov wants to defect to make sure his weapons and research don't fall into the hands of Volgin, a GRU colonel that's at odds with Khrushchev. Volgin wants to use Sokolov's superweapon, the Shagohod, to take over the world. The Fox unit led by Major Zero is sending in Jack, codenamed Naked Snake, to rescue Sokolov and escape, beginning the virtuous mission.
Commencing virtuous mission now.
Snake is aided by Major Zero, who plays the Colonel Campbell role in this game, and Paramedic, a medical expert, and his former mentor, the Boss. The opening gameplay gets players used to the new jungle-based game mechanics before rescuing Sokolov and being introduced to a young hotshot revolver Ocelot who gets schooled by the young Big Boss. Once Snake rescues Sokolov and learns of the Shagohod, things go off the rails when the Boss shows up, announcing that she's defecting to the Soviet Union and pledging loyalty to Volgin. Alongside her is the Cobra unit, her allies in World War II, the Pain, the Fear, the Fury, and the End. The Boss used to go by the Joy, and they used to have an ally called the Sorrow, but he's dead. The Boss is a legendary World War II hero, but allows Sokolov to fall into the hands of Volgin and gives him a Davy Crockett missile. She then beats the crap out of Snake and tosses him into the river while Volgin uses the American-made missile to blow up Sokolov's research facility. This sparks an incident since the Soviets caught the plane that Snake jumped out of on radar, so they demand proof the US wasn't involved with the bombing or anything to do with the Boss. Their response is to send Snake back into Russia to assassinate the Boss, defeat Volgin, and destroy the Shagohod, this beginning Snake's test of loyalty. At the start, he told the Boss that he'd die for the president and the top brass, but she told him that your enemy is often decided by the whims of politics. Now he's seeing that for himself as he has to fight to the death with the woman who raised him and trained him despite not wanting to, beginning Operation Snake Eater. Snake is once again led by Zero and Paramedic, but also Sigint, a weapons expert. Snake makes contact with an NSA codebreaker called Eva, and she helps Snake on his mission numerous times, while also being a spy who's infiltrated Volgin's ranks, while Ocelot is onto her and tries to learn the truth. So Snake has to deal with Ocelot and the Cobras attacking him, work with Eva who tries to seduce him, find a way to rescue Sokolov, defeat Vulcan, destroy the Shagohod, and kill the boss. All in a day's work. Compared to MGS1 and especially MGS2, the plot of this game takes a huge backseat after that. MGS3's story has a lot more to do with the characters and their interactions than anything else. Like seeing Vulcan as this super evil dude because he spends all of his screen time torturing people with his lightning powers. There are still some important moments for sure, like when Snake meets Granin, the man with the plans for what will eventually become Metal Gear, but he's become an alcoholic because his plans were overlooked in favor of Sokolov's Shagohod. Also, Eva gets Snake to explain his relationship with the boss, which can be used to highlight the difference between Naked Snake and solid I don't have a family Snake.
What's the story between you and the boss?
She was like a mother, and my master.
And your lover?
It went deeper than that.
Deeper?
Half of me belongs to the boss.
Do you love her?
No, nothing like that.
Do you hate her?
Does it have to be one or the other? Love or hate?
Between a man and a woman? You bet.
But for the most part, MGS3 is a pure stealth action experience, since most of the second act of the game is just gameplay. Even the bosses don't have much in the way of complex motivations, they show up, fight, and explode. And this gameplay focus is excellent. Lots of cool areas to explore with different ways to get in and out and be creative with your gameplay. The only thing wrong with the game is how much time you spend sifting through really slow menus. But that's a worthy trade to make when the gameplay is otherwise so much fun. But the plot does ramp up towards the end. In one of the best sequences in the series, Snake is captured and tortured by Vulcan for info. All 5 characters are present here and you can just cut the tension with a knife. Vulcan accuses Snake of being after the Philosopher's legacy, a thing Snake has never heard of, but thankfully, he explains it was a $100 billion microfilm divided up all over the world by the major powers and he has it safe in his underground vault.
That's what you're looking for, isn't it? $100 billion divided up and hidden all over the world. And you're looking for a record of where all that money is hidden, right?
Which is great news, because every other person in the room is a spy looking for the Philosopher's legacy, the boss, Ocelot, and Eva. But then there's a time where the boss is accused of being a spy because she put a tracker on Snake, and Vulcan demands she cut out his eyes to prove she's not working with him.
Cut out his eyes? I don't like those blue eyes of his. There's nothing more important to a soldier than his eyes. You made him a soldier, and now you will unmake him. Yes, it'll make for a touching display.
You really start to wonder if this is the moment Big Boss gets his iconic eye patch, but no. Ocelot then announces that Eva is the spy, Snake saving her from his twisted game, and that's how he loses the eye. It's a crazy scene. Also, Sokolov is killed at the start of the scene. I wouldn't usually mention something like that, but I'll come back to it in a few minutes. Snake escapes and has a nightmare battle with the Sorrow, learning that he and the boss used to be lovers but were forced by political circumstances to be enemies. So she killed him, which mirrors the current conflict between Snake and the boss. Snake then meets up with Eva, gets his gear back, and is given his eye patch and sets off in the third act of the story. Snake blows up the Shagohod and beats Vulcan in a fight, but it's not enough as he and Eva are chased down by Vulcan piloting the machine, until they finally destroy it and kill the Mad Colonel. Around this point, Snake also learns that the Philosophers was a group of 12 wise men who were the ones really in charge of the world's events. If you couldn't guess, the Philosophers were the precursors to MGS2's Patriots. Their being active in the early 20th century also lines up with the scene at the end of MGS2 where Otacon says to Solid Snake that the list of names of the Patriots is a bunch of guys who all died about 100 years ago.
Snake, you there? It's me. I've finished going over that disc.
Did you find the Patriots list?
Of course. It contains the personal data of 12 people. There was a name on it. Snake, it was one of our biggest contributors.
What's going on around here?
I don't know.
Anyway, where are they?
Well, we were right about them being on Manhattan, but...
But what?
They're already dead. All 12 of them.
When did it happen?
Well, about 100 years ago.
What the hell?
The legacy is the funds most certainly used to kick the Patriot operation into high gear. But before you can concern yourself with that, Snake must battle the boss and learn of her story. She was sent to space in the 1950s and saw the world for what it really was, one giant landmass. The political maps and conflicts were all so small in the grand scheme of the world, and believed there could be a world without borders someday. She also had a child with the Sorrow in World War II, but her child was taken by the Philosophers. That child is Revolver Ocelot, which the boss does not know, I don't think, but Ocelot most certainly does because he's Ocelot. At this point in the series, you could theorize that the Sorrow's spirit medium powers is something Ocelot might have inherited, and that was really how Liquid came back to take over Ocelot's body in MGS2. But this game doesn't say anything about that, and MGS4 gives a different explanation, so it doesn't really matter. Snake, still not really understanding why the boss defected in the first place, fights to the death with his beloved mentor. This is one of the best bosses in series history, because it's the first final boss in the series where you can use all the gadgets at your disposal to defeat the enemy in whatever way you see fit. It's a true test of everything you learned while playing the game. At the end, she gives him the Philosopher's Legacy and tells him to keep that safe, before she gives him her gun and lets herself be killed.
Kill me now. Do it. There's only room for one boss and one snake.
And then Snake and Eva escape just in the nick of time, as does Ocelot. But it turns out, Eva was a spy too. She wasn't an NSA codebreaker, but a Chinese spy looking for the legacy as well. And she managed to get a copy of it and the film containing data on the Shagohod. But she didn't kill Snake because she thought she needed to tell him the truth. Because there was a scene where the boss pulled Eva aside and told her everything that was going on, and she thought Snake needed to know. Someone needed to know the boss's real story. The boss was never a traitor. Her mission was to infiltrate Volgin's ranks, earn his trust, and steal the legacy. But when he fired the missile, the plan had to be overhauled. The US didn't want to give up its mission to steal the legacy, so they scapegoated the boss and told her that her new mission was to get the legacy and allow herself to be killed by Snake after he defeats Volgin and destroys the Shagohod, and allow herself to go down in history as a war criminal responsible for almost unleashing an international incident. The boss, being a patriot, fulfills her mission to the letter. This revelation shatters Snake because he was a loyal soldier and now finds out that his country was willing to let that happen to one of their most loyal and powerful soldiers. They were willing to allow him to think his mother figure was a horrible traitor for the rest of his life and never tell him the truth, while celebrating him for the cameras and giving him the name Big Boss. It's enough to drive anyone crazy.
The authorities in Washington knew that in order to prove its innocence, they'd have to get rid of the boss. And that one of their own would have to do the job. The public couldn't be allowed to find out about it. Not ever. This, they concluded, would be the best way to keep the whole thing under wraps. The boss wouldn't be allowed to come back home alive. And she wouldn't be allowed to kill herself. Her life would be ended by her most beloved disciple. That was the way the government wanted it. That was the mission she was given, and she had no choice but to carry it out. Her death at your hands was a duty she had to fulfill. Out of duty, she turned her back on her own comrades. A lesser woman would have been crushed by such a burden.
This is the moment where Big Boss's story becomes crystal clear. Why would he go from a legendary soldier into a man creating countries for soldiers to exist free from politics? Because his mentor believed in a world without borders, and he also felt like the way they were both used was unspeakably evil, and decides to eventually break away. Later coming back to the US in the 90s to lead Foxhound to cover his tracks. The game ending on the note that the CIA was impressed with the Fox unit and wants to proceed with further operations, using a soldier as good as Snake in their missions. As Snake just visits the boss's grave and gives a salute in one of gaming's most iconic endings.
But I think she wanted you, of all people, to know the truth. She wanted to live on, in your memory. Not as a soldier, but as a woman. But she was forbidden to tell you herself. And that's why she told me. Snake, history will never know what she did. No one will ever learn the truth. Her story, her debriefing, will endure only in your heart. Everything she did for her country. She sacrificed her life and her honor for her native land. She was a real hero. She was a true patriot.
After the credits, we learned that Ocelot was a primary schemer in this mission too, even decades into the past. Ocelot was playing a role in outmaneuvering everyone the entire time, having ensured that the real legacy reached the US. The one Eva gave to the Chinese was a fake, ending Metal Gear Solid 3, as it becomes the new starting point for the timeline in 1964. Like I said, the plot was much simpler this time and focused on character drama rather than plot twists to guide the story, and I think it was an attempt that certainly worked. MGS3 being a very influential game in the series, as its gameplay with CQC and all that became the elements the series would expand on in future entries. MGS3 got a re-release 2 years later called MGS3 Subsistence. This version did a lot for the game and was almost an entirely new game. It included a third-person camera controllable with the right analog stick, which was a game changer. And it was the first time the MSX games were localized in the US and included them for free. It also had an online mode called Metal Gear Online, which was the first multiplayer mode in the series that also got expanded in later entries. So this was a pretty big re-release, as the series' popularity rose even more in this era. As a result, we got some more spin-offs. Sony released the PlayStation Portable in 2004 in Japan and 2005 everywhere else. Metal Gear was owned by Konami but was still pretty synonymous with PlayStation at this point, so it was time to get some MGS action on the PSP. First up was a game that played nothing like Metal Gear, Metal Gear Acid and its sequel Metal Gear Acid 2. I've never played these games because they aren't stealth action games, they're turn-based strategy games involving cards. Both games do have a story and cool artwork to go along with them, however, as for what's relevant in this video, the Metal Gear Acid games were never intended to be canon, but even if they were, it is to be tossed out because the first MG Acid game stars Solid Snake and takes place in 2016. This is a direct contradiction of how Snake appears old as hell due to the accelerated aging in Metal Gear Solid 4, which takes place in 2014. And there is reason to believe he passed away of natural causes after the events of MGS4, certainly not ready for a sneaking mission in 2016. So these games were a different kind of Metal Gear, hence the different branding. It had nothing to do with the main saga. But while on the subject of non-canon PSP releases, Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 had these comic book adaptations drawn by Ashley Wood. These were animated to motion comics and released on the PSP. Not much to say about them, they aren't canon versions of these stories, but they do contain interesting differences. Such as Liquid Snake name-dropping the Patriots and laughing at Snake for not knowing what they are in MGS1, and Raiden being defeated by Solidus in MGS2 only for Snake to save the day. These were included with the MGS Legacy Collection and the newer MGS Master Collection Volume 1, so I thought those were also worth mentioning. But now we can get back into the core saga with a very interesting entry, the first game where the canon status is a topic of debate to this day. I'm of course talking about Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops from 2006. This was a game for the PlayStation Portable that continued the adventures of Naked Snake. However, it's the first game in the saga that I'm counting as canon that was not directed by Hideo Kojima. Looking at official statements, when explicitly asked about the canonicity of Portable Ops, Kojima didn't really have any opinion on that, stating that he didn't see the game as canon or not canon. He thinks of Metal Gear games as games he directed and games he produced. He was working on MGS4 at the time of Portable Ops' release, so it wasn't directed by him, even if he was involved with it. So in future games like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker and The Phantom Pain, the events of Portable Ops are not mentioned in the pantheon of big boss adventures, nor is it seen as a core part of his story. Kojima wasn't involved with writing it, so that's that. However, if you look at the material from the time, Kojima stated that Portable Ops was crucial to the plot of Metal Gear Solid 4, and that if a detail in one was to change, the other would have to change alongside it. Could that have been marketing slop? Perhaps, but that was his attitude at the time, when Peace Walker and The Phantom Pain didn't exist, and MGS4 was the final chapter. Also, MGS4 directly shows Portable Ops scenes when referencing past events, because prior to the release of Peace Walker, it wasn't really a question if this was a canon game or not. Today, the series has a new way of classifying things. If you look at the grand timeline included in the Master Book you can read inside the MGS Master Collection, you can see real-world history, Metal Gear fiction, core games, and spin-offs. On the timeline, only Kojima-directed games are considered main games, that being MG1, MG2, MGS1, MGS2, MGS3, MGS4, Peace Walker, and MGS5. But the events of Portable Ops and Metal Gear Rising are on the timeline, just considered spin-offs that are canon to the story, unlike, say, Snake's Revenge or Ghost Babel or Metal Gear Acid. Personally, I think Portable Ops should be canon and considered a mainline installment of the series. Forget who directed what, the gameplay of Portable Ops, in hindsight, is arguably just as important to the mechanical evolution of Metal Gear as MGS 2 or 3. Because Portable Ops was the first MGS game to be about recruiting a big team and managing said team, which was greatly expanded in Peace Walker and again in The Phantom Pain. So this game is important both narratively and gameplay-wise. It never got remastered alongside 2, 3, and Peace Walker, but hey, with the Master Collection Volume 2 on the way, it's never too late to give us those games that have been left behind, like Ops or 4 or Twin Snakes. But anyway, what goes on in Ops that makes it important? Well, 6 years after Operation Snake Eater, Naked Snake finds himself in another tricky situation. He's been captured and sent to the San Geronimo Peninsula in Colombia. The Fox unit has gone rogue and broke off from the CIA. Snake is interrogated by Lieutenant Cunningham, who wants him to reveal where the other half of the Philosopher's legacy is. Apparently, only half of it reached the States, but Snake wouldn't know anything about it, to the disbelief of Cunningham. But Snake escapes, meets a young Roy Campbell in the cell next to him. Campbell immediately knows Snake is Big Boss, because everyone in the armed forces knows who Big Boss is. That's one of the main thrusts of the plot, as Snake tries to make contact with Zero, but both Snake and Zero are under suspicion of being involved with the Fox unit going rogue. Snake is like, how could I have had anything to do with it? And Paramedic informs him how his legendary reputation precedes him. To prove he's innocent, Snake has to take out the leader of the uprising, Gene, who has used his strong persuasive powers to turn the Russian forces to his side. Snake is like, looks like I've been done in by my own overblown reputation again. But there's no way Snake can do it on his own this time. Snake needs to convince the local forces to join his side in a counterattack against Gene. This is Snake putting his reputation to good use. People know the name Big Boss, and when they meet the guy, they find him really likable and worth following.
Justice, huh? The meaning of justice can change from one day to the next. A professional soldier never brings justice into the mission. The only ones who need a reason to fight are the ones who fight for a living. That's what my mentor told me.
Your mentor? The one who taught you the art of battle? Who was she?
They called her the Boss. I killed her.
The Boss? The legendary soldier? And Snake, you must be Big Boss. You're the hero who killed Colonel Volgin at Groznygrad.
Prove your loyalty as a soldier. That's what the Boss told me.
Their first recruit, Jonathan, informs them that Gene was so popular with the local troops because he's trying to establish a military nation by soldiers for soldiers free from political manipulation called Army's Heaven, which must ring bells because that's the guiding philosophy that Big Boss will eventually use when making Outer Heaven. On the mission, Snake has to contend with many different foes, including the psychic Ursula, who works for Gene, and an old ally named Python, or the mysterious soldier Null, alongside Cunningham and Gene and their alleged superweapon, while also gaining new allies and recruits like Ursula's twin sister, Elisa, who's a medic, and the mysterious Ghost who gives Snake intel on the weapon. The Shagohod was destroyed, but Ocelot did get the specs on Grandin's plans by the end of MGS 3, so the main superweapon of Portable Ops is the first Metal Gear of the chronology, Metal Gear Raja. Grandin's plans showed something akin to Metal Gear Rex, but this was 35 years before then, so the finished model pales in comparison to the final build, but it is the first Metal Gear. This is a retcon though, because Metal Gear TX55 was treated in canon as the first Metal Gear to ever exist, when as the series stands now, it's not even amongst the first, 5. But that isn't the only retcon. Ghost turns out to be Sokolov, who miraculously didn't die at the hands of Vulcan and was rescued by Gene from a Russian prison camp. At one point in the story, Snake is captured and Gene reveals his backstory in that he was once part of a thing called the Successor Project, meant to inspire a military conflict, and that Metal Gear Raja being stolen and falling into Russian hands is another CIA plot. It also turns out that Ursula and Elisa are the same person with a case of split personality, as the bad side controls Raja and Snake then destroys the mech. But the game isn't over yet when that happens. There are still some more important beats to consider. Like the part where Gene uses his powers to get Snake's men to become paranoid and start shooting each other. Jonathan is one of the casualties, another moment that haunts Naked Snake.
He's lying! Don't listen to him!
He's gonna kill us! He's going to kill us!
Hey! Get a hold of yourself! Snap out of it!
Your enemy is standing right beside you. Is it you? Or perhaps you? This planet is like a giant bomb. See how easily it blows itself to bits with a single nuclear warhead. Or rather, a single bullets. There he is. It's the enemy.
Who's shooting? Who's shooting? The bastard shot him!
Stop! Cease fire! Make it stop, Gene!
If you want them to stop, then why not stop them yourself, Snake? See for yourself, Snake. See what mankind truly is.
Snake! Look out!
Null is also defeated by Snake, and it turns out that he's Frank Yeager, aka Gray Fox. He was always being used as a weapon of war for his whole life, Big Boss being the first person to not use him like that. Making it no surprise he'd follow him in Zanzibar Land in Metal Gear 2. And towards the end, Cunningham reveals to Snake that this whole mission was a conflict that came up between the CIA and the Pentagon. So the Pentagon planned the whole thing, that everyone was playing their part the whole time, and that Cunningham is going to destroy the base with a Davy Crockett once Gene tries to launch a nuke. Snake was also being used in the Pentagon script. He was captured and sent here because they knew he'd stop Gene, after Gene's actions would stoke conflict in the region. Snake has now fulfilled his part of the story and is offered a ride home, but instead he defeats Cunningham and presses on and defeats Gene. Because far too many good people have died in Snake's name for it to be in vain. And especially now because so many soldiers are willing to fight tooth and nail for Snake.
What are you doing? Those weapons won't do any good! Get out of here before you're caught up in the blast and killed!
You risked your life to save our motherland!
Now it's our turn to defend your country!
You've given us a real reason to fight, Big Boss!
Gene tells Snake that he doesn't realize how much he's been played because the story, as we knew, was that Volgin fired the missile and that caused the CIA to change plans and scapegoat the boss. But Gene says that a single strategist already thought of all that several steps ahead, but he won't tell Snake who as they fight, and Snake obviously wins and saves the day. But before kicking the bucket, Gene gives Snake a microfilm with a bunch of resources and cash money that he used for Army's Heaven, thinking Snake's gonna need it someday since the two are so very alike. Naked Snake returns home a hero again, only now even more pissed off because he was minding his own business and got thrusted into this shit show all over again. His life is not in his control. He's used as a tool for propaganda and sent on insane sneaking missions under false pretenses and celebrated for it by government liars who don't give a damn if he lives or dies. Another moment for Snake to really reconsider what he's doing with his life. But either way, the Fox unit is dissolved and plans for a new unit called Foxhound are created. With Portable Ops ending on the note of Ocelot killing the director of Central Intelligence and announcing his plans to destroy the Philosophers. Ocelot then takes the missing half of the Philosopher's legacy from the director, which will be relevant decades later in MGS4. Also, Ocelot does mention on a tape in MGS5 that he got the other half of the legacy from the Director of Central Intelligence, which might be the only explicit Ops plot point mentioned after MGS4. But in the meantime, the post-credit scene is Ocelot talking to Major Zero on the phone about forming something new in the place of the Philosophers, but he'll only join if Snake is involved, thus setting up the creation of the Patriots, with more info to be revealed in Metal Gear Solid 4. Like I said, Portable Ops definitely does deliver on the marketing promises of it being a missing link. I mean, it shows us what Snake was up to after MGS3, him and other innocent soldiers being used and manipulated by governments again, getting the funds for Outer Heaven, finding out the boss's death was a bigger conspiracy than he realized, interacting with Gray Fox, the end of Fox and the Philosophers, and the beginning of Foxhound and the Patriots, and the first Metal Gear. That's a lot of important stuff. The game is not super remarkable. If you consider it a mainline MGS title, it's probably the least fun one in the saga, which is not to say it can't be enjoyed, but it does have some janky elements and some weird controls as a result of the PSP only having one analog stick. But it was a good game and worth a playthrough in my opinion, slotting perfectly into the timeline after MGS3 in 1970. It also got a side game called Portable Ops Plus, but this was about multiplayer stuff. It didn't have any extra story context, which means we can get into another big one for the series, perhaps the biggest one. Metal Gear Mobile for the N-Gage. Nah, I'm just kidding, it's not that. I just wanted to mention that this mobile game existed before going to the actual one, Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. This was the PS3 game to play in 2008. It was a system seller, in fact. boasting a hefty single-player story campaign and an improved online mode, Metal Gear Online 2. The PS3 at launch kind of struggled as the system was difficult to develop for and was really expensive for consumers before the Slim model came out in 2009. MGS4 was a major showcase for nearly everything the PS3 could do with its Blu-ray discs and the Cell processor and a whole bunch of other things. This game was more realistic, more cinematic, more action-packed, and more everything. The new tech allowing the game to streamline many elements that bogged down MGS3 like camouflage. The technological leap between MGS3 and MGS4 was astronomical, as was the timeline jump. MGS3 was the earliest game in the series, and at time of release, MGS4 was the end. It takes place in 2014, 5 years after the end of the Big Shell incident in MGS2. The Patriots got all the info they needed during the S3 project and began towards their next move. By 2014, Snake explains it well. War has changed. War is the thing that fuels the economy worldwide, no longer about nations or ideologies, just private military companies and their huge arsenals battling militia groups all over the globe in an endless series of proxy battles, making billions of dollars. Deploying compact Metal Gear technology like the Gecko that jump around and are almost indestructible to conventional weapons. Players are finally playing as Solid Snake throughout the whole game for the first time in ages, only now he's aging rapidly and goes by Old Snake at many moments throughout the story. Snake begins the game in a Middle Eastern war zone because Campbell has intel that Liquid Ocelot is planning something there. Snake's final mission is to hunt down and kill Liquid before his final plan can be realized. Snake is aided by Otacon as always, who follows Snake on the battlefield with a gizmo called Metal Gear Mark II that he controls from their flying home called the Nomad. Otacon provides the same technical support as usual, and while the two are still fugitives, they take care of Sunny, the daughter of Olga Gurlukovich, who is rescued by Raiden and given to Snake and Otacon between MGS2 and MGS4. MGS4 is split into 5 acts, with a different location in each one. When you strip it down, each act is pretty simple from a narrative point of view. Like Act 1, for example, is just Snake exploring the Middle East for Liquid, meeting people on the way and finding him, but Liquid pulls a stunt and gets away. It's just that the volume of information Snake gets on the mission is what balloons the runtime of the cutscenes. Like when Snake meets Drebin, a gun launderer who will sell you parts and guns and ammo in-game. He informs Snake and the player on how weapons work now. How the current generation of nanomachines that every soldier has gives them an ID, and certain weapons can only be used by someone with the right nanomachine ID. Drebin can break the ID locks for cash. Snake meets up with Rat Patrol Team 10, which consists of Meryl, 2 other guys, and Johnny, the guy whose pants she stole to break out of the cell in MGS1. They are the informants that Snake needs to meet up with to find Liquid, but she's pissed off at Campbell because of his new marriage and refuses to acknowledge him as her father. Meryl explains to Snake and the audience about how the nanomachines allow for enhanced performance in combat, as the nanomachines are monitored by the Patriots' AI systems. This can suppress a soldier's emotions and other things that might get in the way of combat, but enhance other systems of the body that will lead to better performance. Liquid's scheme in Act 1 is testing out his ability to suppress the nanomachines on a large scale with the help of Naomi Hunter. The result is everyone on the battlefield simultaneously feeling the pain and fear and sorrow that comes from battle all at once. Many die in the process, and Snake goes unconscious for a whole day because of it. Waking up back on the Nomad as Snake and Otacon receive a message from Naomi, who is working for Liquid but wants to escape. This begins Act 2 as Naomi and Liquid are in South America, but the mission gets complicated as Snake needs to sneak between 2 warring factions yet again to find Naomi. It is also revealed that Vamp is still alive and working for Liquid Ocelot. To make things even more dicey for Snake, the B&B Corps are out for his head, the new squad of bad guys. Laughing Octopus, Raging Raven, Crying Wolf, and Screaming Mantis. Fusing the emotion-based bosses from MGS3 and the animal ones from MGS1, as these battle-hard and traumatized and superpowered women seek to kill Snake. He battles Laughing Octopus in Act 2 after the villains take Naomi from Snake. But before all that happens, Snake gets to talk with Naomi for the first time since Shadow Moses 9 years earlier. She's the one who confirms that Snake's aging is not a product of fox dye or any other virus, but instead how he was designed. None of the Big Boss clones can reproduce and are set to live shorter lives so they could serve in combat but not live super long past that point. Naomi says Snake has about half a year to live, but to make matters worse, the fox dye that she gave Snake prior to Shadow Moses is mutating. Normally, fox dye targets specific genes, but when it fully mutates, it will turn Snake into a biological weapon that will kill virtually anyone he comes into contact with. The only way to stop it is to take his life. Not that Snake couldn't do it to save the world, but that he has to stop Liquid before that gets to him, or the aging does. Liquid wants to destroy the Patriots. He's assembled an army big enough to take on the US military, but the Patriots, using their system called Sons of the Patriots, could just lock him out. So he plans on hijacking their system too and calling it Guns of the Patriots, and thus creating a new world order to tear down the Patriots' system of control. The deck is truly stacked against Snake in this one, as it's a depressing journey from start to finish. But he's not alone. Like I said, he has Otacon to help, but also Campbell and Meryl, and the returning Rose. She aids Snake on his psych meter and how to manage it, and this is the real Rose, not an AI. But she says her relationship with Raiden fell apart because of how his childhood trauma kept resurfacing after the Big Shell mission and he disappeared. Campbell was there for her and they got together. But of course, Raiden is still around, as he appears to help Snake, only now he's a cyborg ninja who can battle Vamp one-on-one and destroy seemingly undestroyable Gecko. You see, Raiden was not a popular character when MGS2 was new, I went into that earlier, so when writing and drawing art for MGS4, they took Raiden to the drawing board and wondered what would make people like him more. The answer was to make him a cyborg ninja like Gray Fox that goes to fucking town on bad guys. As Snake, Raiden, and Naomi get away, ending Act 2. During Act 2, Raiden mentioned to Snake that the way he found Sunny was by making an exchange with a person called Big Mama. What she wanted in return was the body of Big Boss, the same one Liquid demanded in MGS1. So the team's next mission is to find Big Mama and learn about what she knows about the Patriots and how they can stop it. Liquid needs the body of Big Boss because only with his DNA can Liquid successfully suppress the nanomachines without the incident that doing so caused in Act 1. Liquid tried to use Snake's DNA in Act 2, but neither Snake nor Liquid's DNA is an exact match for Big Boss, setting up Act 3 where a lot of the questions are answered. Snake needs to locate Big Mama in Europe, where Liquid's PMC has control, by using a disguise and following a Resistance member all the way back to Big Mama's hideout. Big Mama is Eva, and she explains a great many things. For starters, she was the one who gave birth to Solid and Liquid Snake, and was the one who gave Solid Snake his actual name, David, and presumably gave Liquid his, Eli. The twin snakes were made by inserting the DNA of Big Boss into an egg donated by a Japanese woman, but Eva was the surrogate mother who gave birth to them, mainly because of how much she loved Big Boss. But more importantly, Eva connects the dots in the whole series. She tells Snake who the Patriots really were. Something Snake and Otacon still didn't know since they assumed the info they got from the disc in MGS2 about the 100-year-old dead guys was junk. Snake confirms that to Campbell in Act 2, not knowing about the philosophers or any of that. So Eva explains that after the San Geronimo incident, Major Zero had the idea for a new organization. Using the funds of the Philosopher's Legacy, Zero, alongside Sigint, Paramedic, Ocelot, Eva, and Big Boss, created the Patriots. Each of them felt strongly about the death of the boss. Even 50 years later, Eva can describe her as having an overwhelming charisma about her.
The boss was a legendary hero from the Second World War, known as the Mother of Special Forces. She had an almost overwhelming charisma about her. The CIA feared this, so they had her eliminated. If she had survived, the world of the 21st century might have been a very different place. We were all influenced by the boss's will. It was what drove us to create this organization, to be closer to that spirit.
They all thought they understood the vision the boss had of a world without borders, where soldiers didn't have to fight friends for political reasons, so they devoted the Patriots to being a kind of new world order meant to bring the boss's will to life. However, when you have a bunch of people trying to do something on behalf of someone who couldn't speak for herself, that's where misinterpretation and ego get in the way. Zero wanted to be the leading authority on all things, and wanted to control the world affairs, having one vision of the world, which is absolutely not what the boss had in mind, so that caused friction between Zero and Big Boss. As I discussed during Portable Ops, Big Boss, or Naked Snake, never really liked how mythic he became after Operation Snake Eater, used as a military propaganda puppet, getting people to enlist in the Force, for the government that sent the boss to die and maybe even planned that from the beginning. So since he was being used like that, he didn't really feel like he had a lot of power over his own life, but the final straw was when Zero, feeling like the world would need Big Boss as an icon, decided to steal his DNA and use it in the project that resulted in the birth of Solid and Liquid Snake. So now, clones of him were going to be running around, so he could never be free. Big Boss broke away from the Patriots and started his own PMC, which was around 1972, 2 years after the events of Portable Ops. And then Eva explains what was really going on in the early games. After 2 decades of his own activity, Big Boss returned to the United States to become the commander of Foxhound and eventually sent Solid Snake on the likely unsurvivable Operation Intrude N313. But it turns out that Big Boss was not intending for Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land to be these military nations of destruction. The plan was to, 1, give soldiers a place to be and live, and 2, fight the Patriots. Big Boss needed the power of Metal Gear to do it. In the time since Big Boss left the Patriots, Zero had become obsessed with control of information and AIs, which is how he started the programs that led to the AI network of the Patriots that established control of everything by the events of MGS2. The Patriots sent Snake on the missions to stop Big Boss in MG2, where Big Boss was taken out, but his body survived and was put into nanomachine stasis by the Patriots. Big Mama finally has his body now. But anyway, after that fallout between Zero and Big Boss, The founders of the Patriots went on to do all kinds of stuff. Sigint became the DARPA chief and died in MGS-1. Paramedic was the Dr. Clark that experimented on Gray Fox after Zanzibar and turned him into the cyborg ninja. Gray Fox killed her upon resurrection. The whereabouts of Zero are unknown, but it turns out that Eva, Ocelot, and Naomi were involved in this ongoing plan to stop Zero and the Patriots and bring Big Boss back. But she's lost Ocelot because he got taken over by Liquid, who is using Ocelot's body to enact his own anti-Patriot plan. Speaking of which, Liquid one-ups the heroes again and gets Big Boss's DNA, which was the final piece of the puzzle he needed to control the Patriot AI that monitored the weapons on Earth and uses it to shut down every weapon on the globe except his own.
The system is mine. Your guns and your weapons are no longer your own.
As Campbell describes, it's the first total ceasefire in human history, effectively tanking the Patriots' war economy in one move. But to really destroy the Patriots, Liquid needs to take down the AI called JD, which is located in a satellite. He needs a nuke for that, but all the world's nukes were under the GW AI's purview, so Liquid doesn't have access to a workable warhead. He needs a nuke from before GW got control of them all, and find a way of firing it. The only way left on Earth is the railgun attached to the remains of Metal Gear Rex on Shadow Moses Island. By the end of Act 3, Liquid is basically all-powerful, and Snake and the rest of the heroes are at their lowest point. Big Mama dies, Naomi's back with Liquid, Big Boss's body is burned to a crisp. For real this time, you just have to forget the time he was reduced to pixelated ashes. And now, the only hope the heroes have is getting to Rex before Liquid. As if Snake didn't feel old enough, he has to travel through the decaying remains of Shadow Moses, a place trapped in time, never touched once in the 9 years since the incident. Liquid has already gotten the railgun though, but it wasn't a total loss as Raiden is able to kill Vamp, and then Naomi reveals she has cancer and used nanomachines to suppress it, but lets herself die of natural causes in this scene, to the cries of Otacon, who started to fall in love with Naomi. Liquid fights the heroes in a Metal Gear Ray unit while they control Metal Gear Rex, which is super cool and exciting fan service, but also kinda symbolic of the relationship between Snake and Liquid in general, where Liquid was the genetically superior one and lost to Snake. While Liquid is using a pristine Metal Gear Ray, the Metal Gear model that was designed to fight Rex, but Snake, using the decaying Rex, wins anyway. Not that this stops Liquid from getting away to his ocean fortress, Outer Haven, where he'll launch the nuke that shuts down JD. All the heroes assemble on the Navy ship led by Mei Ling. The final plan is to launch themselves, Snake alongside Meryl's crew, onto Outer Haven so they can bring the Metal Gear Mark III to the central computer room where GW's AI is, so that Otacon can use the program created by Naomi and Sunny, don't ask, I didn't mention that earlier, to shut down the Patriots for good and stop Liquid Ocelot from taking over the world in the process. Snake has been through a lot by this point, but to get the Mark III to the control room, Snake needs to walk through a microwave tunnel while Meryl and Johnny and Raiden battle with the troops trying to get through to stop Snake. This is one of the most emotional moments in the series as Snake is going through absolute hell in this microwave tunnel, like parts of his suit are burning off, like the solid eye thing blows up from the heat. Otacon's pleading for Snake to keep going while you see footage of all the other heroes fighting to give Snake and Otacon this chance to save the world. It's quite an epic climax, and they pull it off. It's really cool and I guess was Naomi's master plan all along, but MGS4 also commits that story sin of making a smart person in one field just a genius in all. Like Naomi was a genius of genetics in MGS1, but now she's just a gifted AI toppling programmer too. You just gotta go along with it. Snake passes out and wakes up on top of Outer Haven with Liquid, who explains to Snake the whole history of Big Boss waging war on the Patriots, and this was his true plan all along. The two then engage in a long CQC battle with some of the best action cutscene direction in a video game before the final boss. final boss where Snake fights Liquid Ocelot to the tune of the best themes from MGS 1, 2, 3, and 4. But when beaten, Liquid reverts back to Ocelot, proclaiming that the vision of Outer Heaven is now complete, which was his true mission, and that Snake is pretty good. In the hour-long finale of the game, all story points are wrapped up. Campbell reunites with Meryl on her wedding day, as it's revealed that his marriage to Rose was a fake. They knew Raiden's son would never be safe with the Patriots after him, so the wedding was a sham to make the Patriots think the kid was Campbell's, Raiden then getting reunited with Rose and the kid who is actually his. Drebin explains to Otacon that he was a Patriot agent sent to help Snake stop Liquid from destroying them, not knowing that helping Snake was also going to shut them down for good too. As Sonny wonders where Snake is, Otacon giving this emotional line as a response.
Snake is sick. So he went on a trip to help him get better.
We're not going with him?
No. He needs to be alone.
I wonder if I'll ever see him again.
Snake had a hard life. He needs some time to rest.
Are you crying, Uncle Hal?
No. I'm not crying.
The truth is, Snake is at the same cemetery that was at the end of MGS 3, ready to do what's necessary to stop himself from becoming a fox dye spreading bioweapon, which is the note the game seemingly ends on, unless you stay after the fake credits begin. Snake did not do the deed, and instead is confronted with an alive and well Big Boss. This final scene is like 30 minutes long, where Big Boss explains all the remaining questions, such as the fact that the body burned on the Volta in Act 3 was actually Solidus's. Something you could have spotted if you paid attention to which eye was missing, as Solidus and Big Boss were missing different eyes. Liquid was able to use Solidus's DNA to break into SOP because his DNA was an exact match for Big Boss, and that the real Big Boss was reanimated as soon as the Patriot AI was shut down, exactly as Eva, Ocelot, and Naomi planned. His body was reassembled by Eva, Ocelot, and Naomi using different pieces grafted on from the bodies of Liquid and Solidus. The biggest bombshell is that Ocelot was never taken over by Liquid at all. That was also part of his plan. Ocelot used hypnotic suggestion on himself to make himself think he was Liquid. The Patriots needed to be fully convinced that he was Liquid, so Ocelot committed to the bit, let's say. You can tell Liquid's ghost wasn't possessing Ocelot in this one, since Ocelot has a robot arm here, not Liquid's arm like in MGS2. Something worth noting here is that in MGS2, Ocelot would do Liquid's voice when he was in this mode, but in MGS4, when he's gone full Liquid, he still has Ocelot's voice. However, this fact is kind of irrelevant in a canon sense because in the Japanese version of MGS4, Liquid Ocelot is voiced by the man who played Liquid. However, I also learned that the Japanese voice of Ocelot passed away before MGS4, so that might have informed the Japanese team's decision. But either way, I think that's not really relevant to the story. Big Boss explains his feud with Zero and how he finally tracked the man down, old and on life support. He hasn't been Zero in a long time, no idea of anything going on around him. Big Boss regrets how things played out between them, but decides to pull the plug on Zero to really end the Patriots.
We had helped turn 0 into 100. His sin was ours. And for that reason, I'm taking it upon myself to send Zero back to nothing.
Way earlier in the story, when Drebin injected Snake with something, it was actually a new strain of fox dye that replaced the old one. This fox dye is what really killed Big Mama and Ocelot, and now it's going to claim the life of Big Boss. But the good news is, since the old fox dye is overwritten and Snake won't be a bioweapon at all, he can then live out whatever time is left to him however he chooses. Declaring the age of snakes and bosses concluded. MGS4 ends in the note of Snake and Otacon talking about what they're going to do with the time Snake has left. Otacon believing that someone needs to be there to witness the last days of this legendary man who saved the world more times than anyone else, and that it's going to be him. So yeah, that's the plot of MGS4. They really wanted to bring the house down with an epic climax that wrapped up all the plot points in the Metal Gear series, and it certainly delivers. Many fans are divided on how well MGS4 succeeds at its ambition, but from where I'm coming from, I just respect the effort it takes to make a game like this. A game that boldly wraps up 20 years worth of stories and 6 massive games into one big overarching story. That's what MGS4 was and how I choose to remember it, taking place at the near end of the timeline in 2014. But I say near end because MGS4 was obviously not the last Metal Gear game to ever be made. Franchises this profitable don't just end when there isn't more story to tell after all. But the next game was not a chronological sequel to MGS4, and in fact, no Metal Gear Solid game made since has been. However, we're definitely done with the biggest game of the video, so only a couple games are left and they don't compare to MGS4. The next game was released just 2 years later for the PlayStation Portable. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker was going to be like Portable Ops, but massively expanded and directed by Hideo Kojima. They figured there was more story to tell with Big Boss, given that there was a 20-year gap between Big Boss leaving the Patriots and the Outer Heaven Uprising, so Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5 exist to fill in those gaps. So Peace Walker begins in 1974 and follows Naked Snake. Peace Walker is the moment when Portable Ops went from main series canon game into a side game that was canon but not relevant, while Peace Walker is viewed as the continuation of MGS3 now. Even though the game expands on Portable Ops' gameplay, paradoxically, while declaring it not that important. But I just went over all that when discussing PO. So just let it be known that in my eyes, Portable Ops is still canon and important and Peace Walker takes place after it. It's late 1974. By this point, Snake has left the US and the armed forces and also the Patriots. Zero created the Twin Snakes in 1972, and that was the moment when Big Boss had enough and left. So 2 years later, he's commanding a group of mercenaries in Colombia called Militaires Sans Frontières, which translates to Soldiers Without Borders. Snake's second in command, Kazuhira Miller, aka McDonald Miller from Metal Gear 2, brings in guests. Professor Galvez and his peace-loving student, Paz Ortega Andrade. They're from Costa Rica and are upset that an unidentified armed force has arrived in their homeland. Galvez suspects they're working for the CIA. In exchange for MSF's help clearing out the enemies, Galvez promises to hook them up with a base offshore of the Caribbean and a chopper for transport. Snake doesn't believe that Paz and the Professor are who they say they are, but they dangle a carrot in front of Snake by giving him a recording that was recently taken that has the boss's voice on it. The recording belongs to Paz's lost friend, which is enough for Snake to want to investigate.
I gotta thank you for agreeing to this, Snake. Man, am I glad to be out of here. Finally, we can leave all that crap in San Geronimo behind. Break into the mercenary business for real.
The goal of Peace Walker's gameplay is expanding your mother base. You start with a small squad of guys, but you can use the Fulton recovery system to bring knocked out soldiers to mother base and recruit them to MSF. The system is a lot more effective, fun, and in-depth than Portable Ops. You have an R&D team to build you new weapons and gadgets, an intel team, a combat team, medical staff, and the list goes on. Different soldiers all have different stats, and you need to recruit more people to expand Mother Base's efficiency and expand its size, bringing in profits from main missions, side ops, and deployment missions where you send a squad of troops on a mission. If you remember my old review of this game, I said Peace Walker was my least favorite Metal Gear Solid game. For this video, I didn't really play it all the way through again, so I can't speak on if I still think that or not, but the main thing I had against it was that the game, while providing some satisfying stealth action in a mission-based format, was dragged down by grinding for resources, bullet sponge bosses designed for co-op, and just not being as fun as MGS5, which did come out after, but I played that before this one. But some might really get into Peace Walker, so your mileage may vary. Snake and Miller find out that nuclear weapons are being sent to Costa Rica and need more intel, so Snake makes contact with the local Sandinista guerrilla fighters led by Amanda Valenciano Libre. She confirms the troops are working for the CIA and suspects they're trying to stage a coup, because the militia troops have a lot of high-tech equipment like unmanned tanks and aircrafts. Amanda joins MSF and asks Snake to rescue her 12-year-old brother and child soldier, Chico, who is taken by one of the unmanned aircrafts. Snake finds him and also brings him back to Mother Base as the siblings will aid MSF with the mission in any way they can, being the first time on screen that Big Boss has recruited a young person to his side.
I just wasted a bullet. Don't waste your life. Listen to me, Chico. You died here today. You understand? You're hombre nuevo, a new man. Now, give that new life to me.
Huh?
Fight with me, little soldier. Show me how strong you really are.
Snake then goes to a facility being led by the former CIA director, Hot Coldman, who is forcing Dr. Huey Emmerich to continue research on weapons that will get Coldman his job back. Huey is the father of Otacon, and I must say, I always thought it was the coincidence of the century that the fathers of Solid Snake and Otacon just happened to be allies in the past. As I said in my recent MGS4 video, plot points like that serve to make the world feel smaller to me, but that's neither here nor there. Huey tells Naked Snake about how he's building unmanned weapons with complex AI systems for Coldman, which is another thing about both Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain that I found odd. In the grand scheme of things, complex AI technology being developed at this point in the timeline sets the stage for the AI network that rules the world by MGS2 and 4. However, I have always felt like the technology that exists in the 70s and 80s of the Metal Gear Solid universe in Peace Walker and MGS5 feels kind of incongruent with what existed in the 90s of this world with the first two games. Like, where was Solid Snake's iDroid in 1995 when Big Boss was using one in 1975? But I suppose that's just more nitpicking. What I can say about Peace Walker is that it is the most lighthearted and comedic MGS game, giving us flavor text that gives us more insight on Snake and his day-to-day interactions, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
Snake, the R&D team came up with something new.
What's this?
It's a cardboard tank. It's got enough room for 2 people, same as any other cardboard box. Apparently the guy in front drives, and the guy in back is the gunner.
Hold on, Kaz. Who the hell came up with this thing?
I'm sorry, boss. He meant well, I swear. I know it's nowhere as good as a real tank, but still.
It's brilliant!
Huh?
The perfect synthesis of stealth and attack power. Compact, elegant design. The finest example of a weapon I've ever seen. Seriously, Kaz, I need to meet the guy who made this. I want to shake his hand.
You serious? Snake, look at it.
It's a masterpiece, in every sense of the word. You don't agree?
No,
What is that? A tank? I like it.
Puss?
I hate tanks, but this one I think I could get used to. I love that it's a zero-emissions vehicle. It will not hurt the forests of Costa Rica.
What?
Nice work, Kaz. I see I made the right choice making you second in command.
But is there something wrong with me?
Snake, how much do you know about the U.S. Homeland Air Defense Network?
I don't know much about what goes on up in the sky. What I do know is that NORAD tracks Santa Claus on its radar.
Nice one. I didn't know you were a comedian, too.
Huh? No, I'm serious. It's true, NORAD tracks his... Listen to me. Every December they set up a hotline and...
Okay, I get it.
He's real, I tell ya. He used to bring me presents and...
Huey joins MSF and tells Snake that the nukes were for the Peace Walker project, which is the strongest of all the AI unmanned weapons, and that he should find Dr. Strangelove, who is working on the AI mammal pod for Peace Walker. On the way, Snake meets Cecile, a woman who he brings back to Mother Base who owned that tape of the boss's voice, but claims to have never met Paz before. But Snake and Miller decide that's a problem for a later date and press on. This leads Snake to Dr. Strangelove, who loved the boss and yearned for the day she could meet the man who killed her. Wondering why Snake would choose his country over his mentor and mother figure, Strangelove agreed to do the mammal pod AI for Peace Walker in exchange for the CIA giving her all the access to the info on the boss. The mammal pod is based on the boss's mind. Coldman wanted an AI that could, on its own, make calculated nuclear strikes, and she decided the boss was the perfect and most reasonable person to base such a system on. Strangelove wants to use this as a chance to clear the boss's name, since that woman could never have become the war criminal that the history books have painted her as. But Snake maintains to Strangelove that the boss defected to the Soviets and almost caused nuclear war, and it was his mission to kill her. But deep down, even though Snake received Eva's tape saying what was really going on, Snake is still haunted by why the boss would go along with a mission to tarnish her own reputation like that and allow herself to be killed by him under false pretenses, and hopes the mammal pod can tell him why.
I thought I knew everything about her, but I still don't understand what happened to her at the end.
There, you're no different from that scientist woman.
When she didn't believe me, I realized something. That debriefing I heard could have been part of the cover story they made up. Now, even I'm not sure what her real intentions were. Why did she take that mission? How did she feel about dying? Why was I chosen?
Which also I think makes Portable Ops canon again, because that was when Snake was told there might be a larger conspiracy behind Operation Snake Eater, which might make Snake wonder if the debriefing tape from Eva was part of the cover-up. This leads to Snake being captured by Coldman, who tells him that he was the CIA strategist that planned the death of the boss. Which again goes back to that twist from Ops and MGS4, Coldman being the strategist that Gene was talking about. MGS4 also had Eva tell Solid Snake about how the CIA feared the charisma of the boss and wanted her eliminated. This guy, Hot Coldman, is the guy.
You were involved.
The operation to eliminate the traitor. I planned the whole thing.
Now he wants Peace Walker to become the one true nuclear deterrent in the world. He believes humans might be too scared to press the button and end the lives of others so easily, but Peace Walker will have no such fear. While captured, Strangelove tortures Snake, hoping he'll reveal the boss's true final mission. His silence convinces her of her hunch, that the boss was ordered to die for America, programs that into Peace Walker, and finalizes the weapon. And then Coldman also has Paz as a hostage. With information provided by the Sandinistas, Snake tracks down Peace Walker. While it's revealed that Professor Galvez was a fake, he was really an operative named Zadornov and has been working with Coldman from the beginning. But turns on Coldman and plans to take possession of Peace Walker and use it to fire a missile at Cuba. That missile, fired from a US base, will spark an international incident. But MSF is able to capture Coldman and Zadornov with the help of the Sandinistas again, who all cheer Big Boss's name. Snake's mission is then to stop Peace Walker, as a data leak gave the US warning of an incoming nuclear attack, which made them ready for their counterattack. Snake then needs to get them to not launch while he stops the mech. Now, also with the help of Strangelove, who says she only wanted to learn why the boss did what she did and was sorry for the whole torture thing. This sequence is one of my favorites for Snake as a character. For any of the Snakes, since he actually does beg the mammal pod to tell him why the boss did what she did, and you see a moment of vulnerability and desperation from Snake you don't normally get.
Why? I don't understand. Answer me. Tell me why. Answer me!
But at the end of the day, the only way to stop Peace Walker is to sink it. The AI eventually decides to sink itself, sacrificing itself for the good of the world, which really goes to show that the AI is more like the boss than anyone realized, since that's what she did 10 years ago. This ending is an important moment for Naked Snake because he gives another salute to the boss. But in doing so, he takes off her bandana and tosses it into the water with Peace Walker. This gave him the closure on the boss's death that he never got before. That the boss chose to lay down her gun, and with it every part of her entire life besides her patriotism, including him. He's decided that he's never going to live that kind of life and do what makes sense for him. It is at this moment when Naked Snake officially abandons that name and requests to be called Big Boss from now on, when before he would prefer to be called Snake if anyone ever called him Big Boss. Following that, MSF begins a dangerous project. Peace Walker was another continuation of Grannon's Metal Gear research. Big Boss thinks Coldman was right about one thing: the balance of power is going to change in the world soon, and wants MSF to be at the front of that. So Huey and Strangelove get to work on a new machine, Metal Gear Zeke, Big Boss's very own nuclear walking deathmobile. Something he can use as a deterrent for anyone who wants to take on MSF. Something to give them weight on the world stage, as an army without a nation. But Big Boss has to keep dealing with Zadornov escaping over and over again, but that was just a distraction. It turns out that Paz was also a double agent. Paz really works for Major Zero. Zero, as established in MGS4, wanted to create a single will of intelligence and information, and the Peace Walker project was the ultimate test of an AI's ability to act autonomously to carry out the will that they're programmed with. This being the big thing that sets the stage for the Patriot AIs that act on their own in MGS2 and 4, well past the point of Zero even being able to give orders anymore. Zero has a new intelligence agency called Cypher and sent Paz to locate Big Boss. Zero wants Big Boss to come back to the organization and be its face again, but Big Boss refuses, so she threatens to launch a nuke at the US, turning the world against MSF if he won't go with him. Paz takes control of Zeke and fights Big Boss. In this secret final battle, he shuts down the machine and Paz falls into the ocean. But in the end, Miller reveals that he actually did know who Paz and the Professor were all along, but needed their resources to get MSF this big, to get them this base with these resources and soldiers, and it has paid off.
I knew Paz and the Professor. I knew who they really were all along.
'Cause
I used them.
I suppose you were the one that brought them to Columbia in the first place, huh?
Guilty as charged. Paz wasn't just CIA, you know. She was working for the KGB, too. And for this cipher group. In other words, she was a triple agent.
You knew all of this?
Wait, let me finish. Listen, MSF never would have gotten this big if it weren't for them. This mercenary business we built. Someday it's gonna be a new driving force in the world economy.
Is that your goal all along?
Miller sees MSF as the future and themselves as the leading innovators in the PMC business. Big Boss knows the whole world is going to come knocking soon and that they need to be ready, ending Peace Walker on the note of Big Boss declaring this base Outer Heaven, the first time that phrase was ever used in canon.
We will forsake our countries. We will leave our motherlands behind us and become one with this earth. We have no nation, no philosophy, no ideology. We go where we're needed, fighting not for country, not for government, but for ourselves. We need no reason to fight. We fight because we are needed. We will be the deterrent for those with no other recourse. We are soldiers without borders, our purpose defined by the era we live in. We will sometimes have to sell ourselves and services. If the times demand it, we'll be revolutionaries, criminals, terrorists, and yes, we may all be headed straight to hell. But what better place for us than this? It is our only home, our heaven and our hell. This is Outer Heaven.
Really, this could have been the last Big Boss era game. It's the game where Big Boss accepts that name, stops acting out of reverence for the boss, and starts acting for himself and is now in conflict with Zero directly. It is when he first created the name Outer Heaven as well. Some wonder, how could Big Boss get the funds for Army's Heaven from Gene and Portable Ops, but then MSF is so small an operation in Peace Walker before they meet Zadornov? I think that could be explained pretty easily. Maybe he just never used it, or lost it, or spent it poorly between games, or gave it to Zero to help create the Patriots. I mean, Zero already used the other half of the legacy recovered by Ocelot for it, but nothing says Big Boss didn't contribute anything either. I personally think Snake just didn't use it. Perhaps those were the rainy day funds he used to make Zanzibar land in the late 90s. I can explain why I specified Zanzibar over Outer Heaven when I touch on Phantom Pain, but we'll get to that in a minute. Otherwise, I'd say most loose ends are tied up by Peace Walker, slotting neatly into the timeline in 1974. Metal Gear Solid 5 is the direct sequel, but it was not the next Metal Gear game. In 2011, the MGS HD collection came out for the PS3 and Xbox 360. This was a really great remaster collection by Bluepoint Games. It came with an HD version of MGS2 Substance, MGS3 Subsistence, which included Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 inside of it, and a new console 60fps port of Peace Walker. It unfortunately never came with MGS1, which I always thought was a bit odd given how that game was a pretty pivotal part of the story, but still. The HD collection was also the time when the franchise went from being a PlayStation thing to a multi-plat franchise, as all future games would be on multiple consoles. MGS4 was originally going to get a 360 version, but there were so many cutscenes and assets that it would have taken 7 360 discs, and they decided it wasn't worth it and kept it a PS3 exclusive. But then we got a port of MGS3 for the 3DS in 2012 called Snake Eater 3D. What was interesting about this game was that it took the gameplay of Peace Walker and brought it to MGS3. Peace Walker's system of crouch walking and third-person aiming was now in Metal Gear Solid 3. It's like the Peace Walker equivalent of MGS Delta, which we'll get to at the end of the video. It's not really worth seeking out in 2025, but you can get it running on Citra with a higher frame rate if you're interested. We also got a PS Vita port of the MGS HD collection, although this one just came with MGS2, MGS3, and the MSX Duo. Peace Walker was already on the Vita store as a PSP game, so was Portable Ops. And you could also nab MGS1 and VR missions here too, so I was pretty big on playing my Vita Metal Gear versions back in 2016. Then, the MGS Legacy Collection also came out for PS3 in 2013. This included the MGS HD collection and all the games it had, as well as a reprint of MGS4 and a download code to get MGS1 and VR missions as PlayStation Classics on your PS3. So this was a more definitive collection than the 2011 HD collection. If you're using either of these now, just know that to play Metal Gear 1 and 2, you have to access them through the menu of MGS3. I much prefer how the recent collection gave those games their own launchable, but that's neither here nor there. The actual next game was very interesting. In 2013, players were introduced to Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. This was originally a game called Metal Gear Solid Rising that Kojima Productions was doing. It was going to be about Raiden between the events of MGS2 and MGS4, but Kojima Productions was busy and handed the reins of this title to Platinum Games, the studio responsible for the Bayonetta games, among others. Kojima basically let them run wild with the Metal Gear franchise. It then became its own story that took place after the events of MGS4. Fans have debated the canonicity of Rising just as much as Portable Ops. And I thought about this for a bit, since I used to defend the canonicity of both. In Ops' case, it just makes no sense for it to not be canon. I mean, MGS4 directly shows shots and images from that game. And it is canon that Ocelot got the Legacy in 1970 and gave it to Zero, and this was when Zero disbanded Fox as well. These are all things that happened in Ops. There's no Kojima-directed game to fill in that blank, so it might as well be canon, because this is the game that depicts events that other games claim happened. It's really confusing what I just said, but still. In Rising's case, there's no canon game to really validate the events of it, since it's the furthest point out on the timeline, but it also means it doesn't contradict anything either. The MGS Master Collection from 2023 confirming that both Ops and Rising happened, but are considered side games compared to Kojima's games. So I look at it like this. A game can be dismissed from canon only when it's literally impossible for it to have happened. For example, MGNES sees Snake destroy a computer and not Metal Gear directly. That's not how it happened, not canon. Ghost Babel contradicts MG2 and MGS1, which are canon, so Ghost Babel is not. You can't do that for Rising, so it's canon. But what is it about? Well, it picks up 4 years after MGS4 in 2018. Raiden works for a PMC called Maverick Security Consulting while they're helping this African prime minister with getting the country back together after a civil war. This is another reason why MGR is something some would wish to be non-canon. That MGS4 ends with Raiden putting down the blade and trying to live a normal life, and MGR undoes that completely. But that's the thing about canon. Liking what happens in a story is not grounds for canonicity. I spent a long time back in my original 2019 video on MGS4 complaining about how Raiden going back on his MGS2 ending and getting turned into a robot wasn't what I wanted. But that doesn't mean it isn't the story as is, and Rising's no different. Anyway, Maverick has a whole bunch of people at the command center helping Raiden, like Boris, Kevin, Courtney, and Wilhelm. But Raiden is the main field operative. They're attacked by another PMC company called Desperado, led by a cyborg-enhanced man named Sundowner who captures the Prime Minister while Raiden gets attacked by a Metal Gear Ray that he tears to pieces. But then, Raiden is schooled by another cyborg ninja named Jetstream Sam. Sundowner tells Raiden that with the fall of SOP, the war economy tanked 4 years ago. But many are actually upset about that because a lot of people liked SOP and the near endless profits that were brought in from all the fighting. That's something I like about the plot of MGR out the gate. In MGS4, we were told about how evil the Patriots were and how they needed to be stopped. But it is realistic that people like Sundowner liked the system and are upset it's gone. SOP and the nanomachines made soldiers more efficient killing machines. There are so many cyborgs now because this is how PMCs have compensated for the lack of SOP. I just find it compelling to think that the end of SOP and the Patriots doesn't automatically make the world a perfect place. Conflict and issues will still arise, and Raiden is the only hero left to do something about it. In that sense, his continuing the fight almost seems noble from that angle. I also love how the HUD is MGS4 styled in the opening mission, but after that part where Raiden gets his shit kicked in by Sam, he gets a new robotic body and the HUD changes alongside it. The gameplay of Rising is a classic spectacle fighter action game. This is definitely not a Metal Gear Solid game. Instead, it is proudly an action game by Platinum Games. The opening mission really makes you feel like you're playing the Raiden from MGS4 as you tear into this Metal Gear Ray unit. The most interesting thing about Rising is how you can cut through the environments and your enemies and use their power to restore your health. It's a really addicting gameplay loop. I don't think MGR is the greatest action game. If you know my channel, you know I'm a huge Devil May Cry fan. I'd rather play Devil May Cry 1, 3, 4, and 5, and maybe even the reboot before I played Rising. And the mechanics have flaws and systems that could use refinement, but this game is an exciting game to experience and is definitely worthy of its cult classic status. Back to the story, since the game is largely self-contained, I'll try to speed through it, since we've already been here a long time and still have to talk about MGS5 after this. Raiden is attacked by a robot dog that he names Blade Wolf. Raiden manages to convince Blade Wolf to join his side and becomes his trusted ally throughout the narrative, even giving Blade Wolf to Sunny after the plot is over, who's now 12 and also helps Raiden out. Blade Wolf got his own prequel DLC to expand on his story as well. But anyway, Raiden quickly discovers the diabolical plot of Desperado, which is teaming up with another massive PMC called World Marshal, funded by Senator Armstrong of Colorado, where they're using the brains of children recovered from war and placing those brains inside of cyborgs so that they can have the most effective child soldier killing machines the world has ever known. Sundowner calls it the Sears system, taking Solidus's method of using child soldiers and turning it up to the next level. Since Raiden was one of Solidus's victims, he needs to get involved in stopping it. Going Maverick himself, as his team tells him that those brains were obtained legally, but Raiden just thinks this entire thing is morally revolting and will stop it.
Raiden, what is this, Kernia? You cannot resign!
Sorry, Boris, it's done. Can't have a Maverick employee involved in a corporate raiding now, can we?
You could at least come talk to me.
No. It was time to break away from the old team, Boris. Past time.
You cannot take on Marshall all by yourself.
I won't sit by while they butcher little kids and ship their parts around like meat. It's sick.
It's not all so simple, Raiden. They import those brains legally. For medical purposes, it's all done.
Being legal doesn't make it right.
But a battle with Sam and Monsoon has Raiden face the fact that many of the men he has mowed down along the way were often just people trying to make ends meet and were conscripted into combat because they had no other choice. Why does Raiden not care about that? This moment is enough for Raiden to realize that maybe he's not a hero, but instead Jack the Ripper, and always was, and unleashes his fury on his enemies. In-game, you can use Jack the Ripper like the Devil Trigger in Devil May Cry or the Rage of the Gods in God of War. A temporary power boost, but in lore, yeah, it is sad to see that Raiden succumbs to his past yet again. But that does lead to the death of Sundowner in the final battle between Raiden and Sam. Raiden kills Sam and makes his way to Senator Armstrong's main base. But in a DLC that took place in 2016, we do learn that Sam wasn't all evil. He was once on a mission to kill Armstrong and Sundowner himself, but got defeated and offered a job working for them, leading to his role in the main story. But anyway, the stuff with Desperado was a smokescreen. Armstrong needed Raiden distracted while he plotted his true goal, assassinating the president while he was in peace talks with Pakistan, because he wants to incite another war on terror that keeps the war economy going and get elected president in 2020. Because he thinks the world has gone especially soft after the end of SOP and wants to have a Darwinist society where the strong survive and the weak are purged and then make America great again.
America's diseased, rotten to the core. There's no saving it. We need to pull it out by the roots. Wipe the slate clean. Burn it down! And from the ashes, a new America will be born! Evolved, but unchained! The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive, free to live as they see fit. They'll make America great again!
What the hell are you talking about?
You still don't get it. I'm using war as a business to get elected!
But another part of Armstrong's plan was attacking Raiden with Metal Gear Excelsius, which also gets destroyed in satisfying fashion. Only for Raiden to learn that Armstrong is actually far more dangerous in direct combat than when he's piloting a Metal Gear. His nanomachines make him virtually invincible, and I always thought this scene was really goddamn funny to watch.
I could break the president in two with my bare hands! Don't fuck with this, Senator!
Armstrong's line, "Nanomachines, son," became the most overused and overdone Metal Gear meme to ever be joked about, but it's also a funny summation of MGS 2 and 4, so yeah, that's that. Raiden uses Sam's blade to kill Armstrong once and for all, and at the end, the day is saved, but Raiden doesn't want to rejoin Maverick, instead going on to fight his own battles of his own choosing. Which is a pretty downer ending for the guy. The whole thing from the moment Raiden goes Ripper mode was a downer, but nevertheless, that is the plot of Metal Gear Rising. It takes place in 2018 and is the end of the timeline as of this recording. With the popularity of Rising, I feel like it's possible for Konami to want a sequel made, but only time will tell. But we're now at the home stretch, only a couple games left, and we'll start by returning to the 1970s with the game Kojima Productions was doing after Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 5. This promised to be the biggest Metal Gear Solid game ever and to be the missing link between the Big Boss and Solid Snake era games, pretending Portable Ops and Peace Walker weren't also marketed as that. MGS5 was going to be a big open-world Metal Gear with features galore and gameplay the series had never been able to produce before, using the power of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One to their advantage. And using Kojima Productions' own game engine, the Fox engine, to produce legendary visuals and gameplay fidelity. But MGS5 was also a game marred in scandal from the beginning. For starters, this game was the one where David Hayter, the icon that gave Solid Snake his voice in MGS1, was not back to play Snake. It turns out Kojima had been trying to get rid of Hayter for a long time. Some say it's because he didn't like how iconic he became in the English version of Metal Gear, and some believe that Kojima just wanted a big movie star to be Snake. But given who did play Snake in MGS5 and Kojima's relationship with Norman Reedus for the Death Stranding games, I'd say the whole wanting a big star thing sounds right. We even learned that Kojima wanted Kurt Russell to play Snake as early as MGS3, but he turned it down. Hayter had to re-audition to be Snake in every single game. MGS2, 3, Ops, 4, Peace Walker, all of them. But they just never found somebody better. The casting team didn't even tell Hayter it happened. He had to take the director to lunch to hear the news. But that's another classic case of the video game industry having zero respect for the people who bring their characters to life. But it is good to see Konami embrace Hayter again now that Metal Gear is back in action. In MGS5, Snake is played by Kiefer Sutherland, who I honestly think does a really great job with it. Kiefer sounds a lot more like a real person than Hayter's Snake ever did past MGS1. It's just jarring because he sounds like a completely different dude, which for reasons I'll explain actually works fine in the main game. Less so in the prologue.
Boss, can you hear me?
What's up, Huey?
Which leads to the next and worst scandal. The fact that the budget for Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was ballooning to such an extent that Konami and Kojima Productions pulled a stunning move. They took the prologue mission out of MGS5 and sold it as its own game. And so, in 2014, we got Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. This was a scandal because Ground Zeroes has a couple of very samey missions all on the same map, and only one of them has story relevance, and it's only about an hour long. Because it was the intro mission of MGS5, not its own game. They just tried to staple extra content onto it to create an illusion of value. Konami tried selling this for $40, $20 shy of the full price game, despite having next to no real content of substance. Like, holy shit, talk about scam of the fucking century. The backlash made them knock it down to $30. I originally paid like $5 for this, and anything more than that is truly the scam of the century. Currently, you can get MGS5 Ground Zeroes for $20 on Steam and $20 for Phantom Pain. Don't do that. Buy the bundle for $30. The idea they're even still selling Ground Zeroes for anything more than $5 is an outrage. Having said that, Ground Zeroes is a really fun game, just not worth the price of admission. All those amazing things that MGS5 promised to be were visible in Ground Zeroes, making it one of the most fun sneaking missions in Metal Gear history, as MGS5 is just one of the best controlling stealth action games ever made. So it's fun, just overpriced. But what's the game about? Well, Ground Zeroes picks up a few months after Peace Walker in 1975. MSF continues operations as normal until the UN asks to do a nuclear inspection of Mother Base. Big Boss and Kaz turn it down because they don't want anyone to know they have nukes and a means to fire them. But then Huey goes behind Big Boss's back and agrees to the inspection, so Big Boss and Kaz need to get MSF ready for the staged inspection. Huey believes that if they hide Zeke and the nukes, and the inspectors don't see them, then the world will be convinced that MSF is above board. To do so, Big Boss orders document destruction and other forms of evidence tampering like lowering Zeke to the seafloor, which might be a clue that you're playing as a man who is morally compromised. At around that same time, Kaz has heard that Paz is still alive and was picked up in the ocean and sent to an American black site called Camp Omega, the MGS universe's Guantanamo Bay. Chico, who had a crush on Paz before she betrayed MSF, has gone off to rescue her but got captured as well. So Kaz sends Big Boss to Camp Omega to rescue Chico and Paz. Mainly because of the fact that Kaz has evidence to believe that Cypher might kill Paz and MSF needs to get her back to interrogate her to get info on Cypher, and they also don't want Chico blowing the whistle on Zeke or its capabilities. The rescue is set for the same evening as the inspection. The opening cutscene shows the inspection is definitely fake and is led by the mysterious Skullface and his org, XOF, and they take off from Mother Base right as Big Boss arrives at Camp Omega.
I'm in front of the prison camp.
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
Kept you waiting, huh?
The plot is actually pretty straightforward from there, given the fact that the game is an hour long. Big Boss finds Chico, but he has bolts in his feet, so he carries him to the chopper and he uses his tape recording to find Paz's location. which is oddly framed like a tender scene when Big Boss's first words after Kaz told him that Paz was alive was if his mission was to shoot her, but he rescues Paz and puts her on the chopper as well. And that's it, that's the entire mission. So I'd instead like to use this time to say some observations I had about Ground Zeroes. Like how, man, they really couldn't keep their story straight for 5 minutes. Peace Walker was literally the previous MGS game and already some details are getting muddled. Like how there's an optional radio call where Miller will just say, "I just want peace for my country." And I can't believe we ever bought that cover story to Big Boss. I didn't get any footage of it even though I tried. But the Metal Gear Wiki confirms it is a thing that Kaz actually says in Ground Zeroes, despite Peace Walker saying he already knew from moment 1 who Paz and the Professor were. He just wanted the base and the chopper for MSF. But next, and significantly less nitpicky, is that the tone of Ground Zeroes is its most shocking quality. Especially because this game takes place just months after Peace Walker, which is the most lighthearted Metal Gear game ever, even getting a T rating. But now, Chico and Paz are at Guantanamo Bay, and if you just listen to the tapes, you learn how Skullface tortured Chico and Paz to get info about Big Boss and Zero, using physical and sexual and psychological methods, and it's pretty disturbing stuff. The tonal whiplash is bad enough, but it does come off like shock value more than anything else, especially once they get on the chopper. Chico notices that Paz has incisions on her abdomen, and the medic on board confirms that Paz is rigged to explode.
Snake!
Medic! She's rigged. Damn it, we were set up!
We gotta get it out. No time for anesthetic. We have to open her now.
But they open her up and take the bomb out and toss it in the ocean. This scene is just really nasty as guts are going everywhere, which contributes to the idea that the game is in love with shock value more than anything else. But then, they return to Mother Base and it's on fire and sinking into the ocean because the inspection was a fake setup by XOF to destroy Big Boss and Mother Base. Miller gets on the chopper with Big Boss as they watch the base they worked so hard to build sink into the water.
They played us like a damn fiddle! Give it back! This isn't right, that was ours! We built it, damn it! You spying bitch! Come on, start talking, bitch! Come on, get up and start talking!
But it's not over yet because Paz has a second bomb in her crotch and she tries to jump off the chopper, but she blows up and the explosion kills Chico, sends Miller and Big Boss to the hospital while Big Boss goes into a coma, ending Ground Zeroes on a cliffhanger that wouldn't be resolved for another year and a half or so when Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain came out in 2015. Ground Zeroes is not a standalone product. You can't really understand the plot without Peace Walker, and you won't get a satisfying conclusion out of it without The Phantom Pain. But it is its own game, technically, so it goes in the timeline in 1975. I was saying before that the scandals of MGS5 were numerous, and I wasn't lying. Before The Phantom Pain came out, people were commenting on this female sniper design looking ridiculous, more than the MGS series already was known for. And then the ultimate controversy is the one that still hangs over the series to this day. The fact that MGS5 saw Konami and Kojima part ways around the time of the game's release, to the point where the box doesn't even say a Hideo Kojima game like MGS2 and Onward all did. I'll get back into it later, but Konami was shifting away from big budget games and focusing more on mobile games and casino profits, when Kojima's model was all about the high budget artsy game. MGS5 was ballooning over budget, which led to the existence of Ground Zeroes in the first place, generating extra revenue for the final game. It was also coming out around this time about Konami's treatment of its employees, which really soured people on their games. But the budget issue was the straw that broke the camel's back, and was the reason why The Phantom Pain was the last Metal Gear Solid game for over a decade. But the game did release, and is one of the most fun games ever made, if you ask me. Just with some very massive pacing issues and a terribly barren open world, but it takes all the concepts of base development from Peace Walker and makes it more fleshed out, with some of the most enjoyable sneaking and shooting mechanics in any game I've ever played. But the story especially was something people were very disappointed by in this game, and I'll give you the rundown. MGS5 has a lot of plot, but not a lot of story in the moment-to-moment gameplay. This allows you to enjoy the game, but it does also mean that a lot of the basic plot motivations are only an optional flavor text. I'll do my best to give you the story in broad strokes, though, because I have a lot to say about this game's ending, which is the most important part, if you ask me. If it was a full breakdown, I'd probably be here for another hour. And speaking in hindsight after having written all this game gets a lot more screen time than I thought, so let's get into it. Big Boss wakes up from his coma, however, it's been 9 years since MSF was destroyed by Skullface and XOF. It's now 1984 and Big Boss is in a hospital in Cyprus. XOF has learned of his location and sent a female assassin to kill Snake, but he's saved by another patient who calls himself Ishmael and starts calling Snake Ahab, after he sends that woman flying out the window on fire.
What happened to the woman?
The woman? We gave her a light. She took the short way down.
All hell breaks loose as XOF raids the hospital and starts killing everyone in order to find Big Boss. To make matters worse, you also have a child Psycho Mantis and a man on fire. This is a tense opening if you've never played the game before, but I have played the Phantom Pain much in my life, so I dread the mere thought of this mission. It might actually be one of the most scripted sequences in Metal Gear history, and you aren't even doing anything except this. Anyway, Ishmael disappears, but worry not. Snake is then aided by Ocelot in escaping the man on fire. Ocelot says they need to rebuild MSF into something new. To do that, they need to rescue Kaz, who's currently trapped in Afghanistan. This game is a really interesting depiction of Ocelot. He was the never-ending backstabber in MGS 1, 2, 3, and 4. From the beginning of the timeline in MGS 3, he was manipulating all the events of the series to lead to the events of MGS 4. But in MGS 5, we get to see Ocelot in a friendly role, as he always loved Big Boss and did most of the stuff he did with Big Boss's interests in mind, as Big Boss explained to Solid Snake at the end of MGS 4. Snake goes by a lot of names in MGS 5. His new moniker is Punished Venom Snake, so I'm going to call this character Snake, Venom, Venom Snake, and Big Boss, and just know that while I'm talking about MGS 5, those are all the same person. Snake rescues Miller, and they return to their new offshore base, but I have to wonder, I feel like a giant water oil rig type base seems kind of easy to attack, right? Like, I'm not a military strategist, but I feel like MSF should have shown them that maybe that structure doesn't make for the most fortified base, but it's what they got. The new org, led by Snake, Miller, and Ocelot, is called the Diamond Dogs, and their plan is simple. Rebuild the foundations of MSF, make it bigger and better than ever before, and get revenge on Skullface for taking it from them. And that's part of what makes MGS 5 a more laid-back story in the moment-to-moment gameplay. This game is mission-based like Portable Ops and Peace Walker, but those two games are still building one giant narrative with each mission. MGS 5 is also building a larger narrative with each mission, but there will be many missions where Snake's goal doesn't really have anything to do with Skullface directly, but instead the Diamond Dogs are taking on a variety of jobs in Afghanistan and Africa. You play as Snake, or your Diamond Dog of choice, in various missions in these huge open worlds. MGS 5 is guilty of being the kind of open world game where you spend a lot of time just driving to waypoints. But having said that, the stealth action gameplay of MGS 5 is just really fun, which I was saying a moment ago, but seriously, take MGS 3's element of giving players the ability to approach situations from a variety of angles and dial it up to 11, and you have MGS 5. Which is why I could never not love this game. I've played it for hundreds of hours in the last decade. But beyond that, the name of the game is very similar to Peace Walker. You recruit guys to your team, you expand Mother Base, all very familiar stuff. Only the systems, I felt, were more compelling in Phantom Pain than Peace Walker, as you actually can visit Mother Base and see the faces of your various staff. Not that it adds much, I mean, there's nothing to do on Mother Base, but I feel as though it was more immersive in MGS 5 than Peace Walker. The Diamond Dogs assume that the inspection of the MSF Mother Base was just Cypher out for revenge for defeating Paz and rejecting Zero's offer in Peace Walker. But what they learn here is that this wasn't the case. Apparently, Zero was usurped at Cypher, and Skullface, the leader of XOF, was working for Zero at one point, but they went rogue and did the attack on MSF of their own volition, and now Skullface has his own plan to change the world. So with a face and name to hunt, the Diamond Dogs pursue Skullface by doing jobs and finding out what he's up to. Skullface makes use of parasites to strengthen his forces, sending the superpowered skulls after Snake in plenty of the game's missions, but also the sniper Quiet. She was the assassin who came after Big Boss in the hospital, and parasites kept her alive and gave her superhuman abilities. You beat her in a sniper duel and take her back to Mother Base, and she becomes your ally. Although she never says a word throughout all of it, which is where she gets her name from. You can choose to kill her, but saving her is canon to the story. The plot twist being that her outfit actually looks like that because, get this, she's photosynthetic like the end, but for her and her alone, she has to breathe through her skin. Compelling stuff. But anyway, Skullface's entire plan involves a new kind of parasite called the vocal cord parasites. You see, Skullface, like Zero and Big Boss, believes a new era is approaching, but to reach Skullface's vision for it, he needed to wipe out both of these men. Hence the attack on Mother Base and Ground Zeroes. Skullface intends to use the vocal cord parasites to wipe out the English language. Vocal cord parasites infect someone and it can detect the language they speak and transmit the disease by speaking that language to anyone else who also does. Skullface thinks English as the world's biggest language represents nothing but cultural suppression and dominance, so he intends to wipe out the English language and create a new kind of monoculture born from its ashes. He knows many people will die in the process, but he believes this is how the world can really become one like the boss envisioned. Which I think is interesting, having another person try to do the boss's will, because it shows, yet again, how every single person who claims to act in her name mysteriously seems to inject things that matter to them. Like, the boss wanted the world to be one again, so Zero goes about that by creating an information network that controls everything, which was something he wanted. Big Boss created a military nation, something that was relevant to his experience post-killing the boss. He even says when building Zeke that the boss probably wouldn't do that, but still, it makes perfect sense, guys. Come on, let's build that nuke. And now, Skullface wants to make the world one by eliminating English supremacy, since his culture was eradicated and stolen from him and he was forced to assimilate into English culture as a child. Not an unreasonable motive given that backstory, just that I find it interesting how many characters keep invoking the name of a woman who is dead and can't speak for herself as the justification for the actions they take to achieve goals they already wanted to. Another thing Skullface is up to is shifting the balance of nuclear power around the globe. Skullface is trying to flood the market by giving militaries worldwide access to bipedal weapons like the Walker gear, so they come to him for increasingly more powerful weapons to use against their enemies. His contingency plan is that the weapons he sells are laced with metallic archaea, and he can use that to make weapons he sells useless in an instant. Skullface will use his own Metal Gear as proof of how big and bad his own weapons are to make sure he is the seemingly strongest force on Earth. And that is Metal Gear Sahelanthropus. The trick is, though, that this weapon doesn't actually work on its own. The reason Sahelanthropus doesn't is because Skullface didn't want to attach it with the mammal pods that the mechs and Peace Walker had. Instead, he uses Psycho Mantis' mind powers to control the weapon. Doesn't make it any less deadly, though. Sahelanthropus was built by Huey Emmerich, who was taken by XOF when they raided Mother Base and Ground Zeroes. The Diamond Dogs rescue Huey, but not because they consider him a friend. Snake, Miller, and Ocelot all think that Huey knew the inspection was fake. Remember, Big Boss and Kaz turned down the inspection, and then Huey went behind their back and agreed to it. Big Boss saying they had no choice but to go along with it then. What's also suspicious is that Strangelove left Mother Base the week before the inspection. Huey and Strangelove became romantically involved between Peace Walker and Ground Zeroes, so the main characters think he must have known Mother Base is going to be attacked, made a deal with Skullface to be spared, and told Strangelove to clear out. Between games, they had a son together, Hal Emmerich, aka Otacon. Huey and Peace Walker felt like a really superfluous character, like just kind of an excuse to have Notacon in the game. He even had the same voice actor. But I'm glad they do in hindsight, because Huey is one of the most compelling characters in Phantom Pain, because Miller is pissed off and thinks Huey is guilty of being the reason they lost MSF, and Huey is passionate about his not having done it. Miller also didn't need to be a pre-established character in Peace Walker, but I also think the Phantom Pain does a lot to make him interesting and inform his later role, since he's angry and bitter throughout all of MGS5 and is the team cynic. But that context makes his sagely advice to Solid Snake in Metal Gear 2 feel a little more textured, since we know it's coming from a man who's been through hell and we got to see it. Speaking of pre-established characters, though, there's also the leader of the child soldiers in Africa called the White Mamba. Snake rescues the child soldiers and takes them all to Mother Base, and captures the White Mamba, who is Liquid Snake, real name Eli, back when he was 12 years old. Big missed opportunity for the story was giving us the reason Liquid hates Big Boss on screen. He already hates Big Boss before he even meets him here. Eli doesn't really add anything that great to the story at all, neither does him meeting a young Psycho Mantis. Like, does that really need to be a thing? Like, that just feels like fanfiction to me, but anyway, stopping Skullface from preventing an epidemic of vocal cord parasites is the primary mission of the Diamond Dogs. So they find Code Talker, a Navajo expert on parasites that was forced to work for Cypher, and recruit him for his expertise in preventing an outbreak. From there, they learn of Skullface's location and launch an attack. Not before Skullface explains his life story to Venom Snake in this really long car ride. I already went over his motive, but this scene also tells us what XOF is. It was a support group for Fox that Zero set up. Ocelot explains it to Snake in a tape, but Skullface also tells it to Snake directly. Skullface was personally there in 1964 when Snake explored Groznygrad. Zero needed insurance. Remember, the Virtuous mission and Operation Snake Eater were tests for the viability of a Special Forces sneaking mission team, and it was a resounding success. The Fox unit later became Foxhound. But to make sure Naked Snake completed his mission, he created XOF, a completely off-the-books org that reported to Zero alone. Skullface's mission was to scout ahead to provide intel to Zero that he could relay to Snake and then be Snake's cleanup crew to make sure the mission was a success. Skullface was the one behind the scenes guaranteeing the mission worked and Zero got what he wanted. Zero was then able to use that success to fluff up the myth of Naked Snake. Like Snake said in Portable Ops, he already had an inflated reputation by 1970. And then Zero made him the mascot of the Patriots as well and cloned him to make sure they'd always have Snake. But that led to them falling out around the time Skullface decided to go rogue and form his own plan. But things don't go according to plan, as Psycho Mantis is able to sense the anger against Big Boss stirring in Liquid, who is brought to this mission for reasons unknown, and then that allows Mantis to activate Sahelanthropus against the wishes of Skullface and wreak havoc that you need to stop in the boss fight.
Who is doing this? Such a lust for revenge?
So basically, Liquid hijacked the Metal Gear story again, because Kojima just really likes this villain, as if Liquid Ocelot wasn't enough of a reach. But regardless, Snake destroys the machine and he and Miller get their revenge on Skullface, leaving him for dead before Huey kills him. The Diamond Dogs keep Sahelanthropus at Mother Base as proof of their existence and proof they saved the world from another disastrous incident. That ends Chapter 1 of Phantom Pain, but there is a second chapter. Not a lot happens here because many of the missions are just optional hard mode variants of missions you've played already, so I'll be quick. Huey continued working on Sahelanthropus, and also thanks to Huey there's a vocal cord parasite outbreak at Mother Base because he was experimenting on the parasites to turn them into weapons. Because of this, you get a chilling mission where you have to go into the quarantine bay and execute your own staff members. Some are shocked and beg, and the last few just salute Big Boss, accepting that they need to die in order to stop the spread. It's definitely one of the best parts of the story when it comes to emotional moments in MGS5. As Snake refuses to dump the ashes in the sea and instead wants to make diamonds out of them.
I won't scatter your sorrow to the heartless sea. I will always be with you. Plant your roots in me. You're all diamonds.
But this was also Huey's final strike. Miller has Snake recover the mammal pod and get evidence out of it. And what they learn is that Huey used Child Otacon to test pilot a Metal Gear, which obviously angered Strangelove, so he locked her in the mammal pod and let her slowly die. The Diamond Dogs put him on trial for all that he's done. And what's fascinating about this scene, though, is that they still never produce any proof that Huey knew the XOF inspection was fake. In his first scene with Skullface, he calls Huey a traitor, and I don't think Skullface would consider him an ally at any point, so I think that confirms that Huey sold MSF out to save his butt. But still, the Diamond Dogs never have any proof of that. But they do have proof of his other crimes, which is enough to want him out of here. In one of the best acted scenes in the Metal Gear Saga.
Prepare a life raft. Big enough for one. Food and water, too.
Boss.
He's leaving.
He's responsible for all of this! Think of all the men! He didn't lose a damn thing! This is the enemy! And he's here on his knees!
Us. You are right, he is not one of us. But we are not responsible to judge an enemy. He leaves Mother Base, and that'll be the end of it.
I'm innocent! You're the murderers! Snake! You should be in this boat! There'd have been no inspection if it weren't for your precious nuke! I risked my life trying to save you all! How can you do this? Am I the only sane one here? It's not my fault!
You can't discard your phantoms forever, Doctor. Son of a bitch will make it, you know. I can see it now. In no time, he'll be telling tales about the black-hearted Diamond Dogs. The shining white knight, blabbering on about our injustice, hiding behind his fool's idea of morality. And all the other fools will stand around, nodding with every word he says.
No. One day he'll see through the lies he's built up. Realize what kind of man he really is. What goes around comes around. You can't run from yourself forever.
The camera mysteriously lingers on Snake there, but before I get into that, I'll discuss the other lingering plot threads. One of them is that Quiet was actually carrying the English strand of the parasites and was meant to spread it to Snake and kill them all from within. But she grew to like Big Boss and kept herself quiet to save them all, but leaves to make sure nobody gets infected by coming into contact with her. The man on fire was also the reanimated corpse of Colonel Volgin. He attacks you throughout the game, but I never had a good moment to mention that before now, and Psycho Mantis was also behind him attacking you. And then Eli escapes Mother Base with Sahelanthropus, leading to another scandal from MGS5. How this plot thread ends on a cliffhanger in-game with no resolution. This was a very big mission cut from the game that never got finished, where Snake and crew tracked Liquid down and stopped his antics. The fact we got to see unfinished clips of this mission outraged fans because it made the final game feel incomplete that it had such a blatantly unwrapped plot thread left dangling like this. I don't know if you'd want to argue that the cut Mission 51 is canon since it's not in the game, but we have seen what it was going to be like. But anyway, now you should strap in because we're going to wrap this game up with Mission 46, The Truth, which is just playing that fuck-ass hospital mission again. They don't even have the courtesy of letting you skip past the part where Snake can't even stand up. The mission is the exact same as the opening one, but it's just what happens after that matters. Because this mission and the truth tapes you unlock at this point of the story tell the whole truth of what happened between Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain. First, we get a tape of Zero hiring Paz to go after Big Boss before the events of Peace Walker. This tape confirms that Paz knows where Zero lives. Then there's a tape of Skullface getting Paz to tell him where Zero is hiding. Skullface then sent Zero a keepsake he was looking for, but it was fake. He sent the fake with parasites to infect Zero and kill him. Just turn him into a vegetable within a year or so. That's how Zero ended up in the state we saw him in at the end of MGS4. Zero had already established the infrastructure to get his AIs built and carry on his will without his direct input, though. So that's how all that came to be. Zero and Skullface disagreeing about the usefulness of parasites to begin with. Zero thought vocal cord parasites were too imprecise in killing specific targets, but was interested in what these parasites could teach us about genetics. These parasites being the precursors to performance-enhancing nanomachines, and the vocal cord target system was later refined and became the Foxdie virus. But this scene also confirms that Zero was not responsible for Skullface's attack on Big Boss and Ground Zeroes. In fact, these tapes all confirm that Zero was a critical part in Big Boss's recovery. He and Ocelot prepped where Big Boss is going to recover safely, and Zero told Kaz the phrase that'll be spread around for when Snake is back. V has come too. In one of the last tapes, Zero, in the time of consciousness left to him before the parasites incapacitated him fully, decides to visit Big Boss while he's still in a coma. Zero doesn't explicitly say, but I think the point of this scene in this tape is that Zero is trying to say sorry for all that happened because he doesn't have any ill will against Snake.
I had no intention of coming, but this could be my last chance. If you'd just come to see me first. I'm quite sick myself. Up here, there's nothing they can do. I always was the forgetful type, as you know. I'm all right for now, but they say it's a one-way street. If you don't wake up soon, I won't remember you when you do. I don't mind about myself, but what he did to you, I can never forgive. Jack, once your little holiday here is over, well, who knows when that will be? But anyway, I probably won't be around. Wake up soon, old friend. Time is running short.
And this explains why the Patriots AI tried to preserve Big Boss and his legacy even after his supposed death in MG2, because Zero always wanted the legend of Big Boss to continue, which is why Big Boss was so easily allowed back into the US in the 90s to lead Foxhound, when you'd think the Patriots would stop him if they were enemies. Zero sent Paz to get Big Boss back because in his own weird way, Zero wanted his friend back. The sad part of this tape is that Big Boss clearly never heard it because by the time they're face to face again in MGS4, Big Boss doesn't seem to know all that and thought Zero hated him. But there was one gift Zero gave to Big Boss he was willing to take advantage of, which is the twist you learn about in the game's ending. Zero and Ocelot felt Big Boss wasn't safe while in a coma and hatched a diabolical scheme to keep him safe. In the chopper explosion in Ground Zeroes, Big Boss, Miller, Chico, and an MSF soldier were there. Chico died, but the other three were in the hospital, and Zero had this man surgically turned into a body double of Big Boss. And while he was comatose, he had Ocelot use hypnotic suggestion to implant false memories of all of Big Boss's missions and experience onto him. This retroactively setting the stage for the reveal that Ocelot used hypnotherapy on himself to turn himself into liquid in MGS2, because he's done it to other people. In MGS5, The Phantom Pain, you never play as Big Boss, you're playing as Venom Snake, an MSF medic who was turned into Big Boss and tricked into thinking he was Big Boss the whole time. He was supposedly MSF's best soldier too. In the real world, this twist is meant to break the fourth wall. Venom Snake, Big Boss's top guy, is you, the player. The you are the great soldier that helped Snake reach victory all those years ago. But in-universe, the truth of Venom Snake and what that says about Big Boss is actually horrifying. Venom Snake was once an ordinary soldier who believed in Big Boss. Big Boss was Ishmael guiding Venom through the hospital in the opening mission. And Big Boss had literally no problem with Ocelot telling him they were going to use this man as a fake Big Boss so that the real one can hide out and stay out of harm's way, so that Venom Snake could fight Skullface on Big Boss's behalf, thinking he is Big Boss, because the real Big Boss had an epiphany after the explosion in Ground Zeroes.
Cheating death by mere nanoseconds, I suddenly realized something very important. I could have died! Me!
Big Boss.
Imagine an entire galaxy with no more me!
Big Boss truly became so arrogant as to believe the world couldn't go on without him, and like I said, was happy to allow this innocent man to have his entire life and identity stolen from him so he can do Big Boss's dirty work. Ocelot and Miller both knew Venom wasn't Big Boss the entire time, but they were just going along with it. Ocelot because it served the interests of the real Big Boss, and Miller because he thinks long term he can use this as a chance to get revenge on the real Big Boss. Miller felt betrayed that Big Boss would give up on the business they were building together and go into hiding, so he wants Big Boss dead now.
The real Big Boss is working separately from us to create his new nation.
New nation?
A military nation above and apart from all. The true outer heaven. Something created to maintain world balance. Independent of the struggles for supremacy, for personal profit, the cycles of revenge between countries. It'll be an army, all right, but more. Big Boss is building a nation. But until it's complete, we support the other Big Boss. The Phantom carries on his legend, his meme. That is Big Boss's plan.
So that's the way it is. 9 years ago, I thought everything had been taken from me. But now I really have lost it all. The boss, and the future we were building together.
One day, the age of Big Boss's sons will arrive. They'll likely want to settle the score with him. We have to shape that age. We'll each have roles to play. Building the foundation for a revolution led by both Big Bosses, the True One and the Phantom.
No. Big Boss can go to hell. I'll make the Phantom and his son stronger to send him there. For that, I'll keep playing my role.
And he got to be a part of that revenge when he helped Solid Snake in his mission to kill Big Boss in 1999. But the plot thickens from there, as MGS5 ends with Big Boss giving Venom a tape where he tells him the truth. He treats it as though Venom has been bestowed a great honor by being Big Boss. But Venom, being such a loyal follower of Big Boss, just accepts his fate as the guy who will act as if he's Big Boss from now on. The tragedy of Venom is that both his past, his life before MSF, was stolen from him and erased. And now in the present he sees another man's face looking back at him in the mirror. But then his future and legacy was also stolen from him. Everything Venom did to save the world during MGS5 is going to be credited to Big Boss, who was hiding out at that time. Venom then followed orders and laid the groundwork for Outer Heaven while the real Big Boss went back to Foxhound. Because this scene also confirms that the Big Boss that Solid Snake killed in 1995 was Venom Snake, but the Big Boss he killed in 1999 was the real deal. So Venom dies with no legacy since everything he did from 84 to 95 gets credited to Big Boss. Even in his final moments in MGS4, Big Boss is still pretending everything Venom did was his own. By saying, "You erased me 2 times before," he's still pretending he was in Outer Heaven fighting Solid Snake. But hey, credit to Big Boss, he actually warned Venom this was going to happen. On the reverse side of the tape Venom got from Big Boss, it says Operation Intrude N313, Solid Snake's mission in MG1. When he puts it in, you can see the MSX turn on in the blue light from the MSX boot-up screen in the distance. Big Boss basically gave Venom a copy of Metal Gear 1 as a simulation of future events, meaning that over 11 years before then, Big Boss fully planned for Gray Fox's mission, Operation Intrude N312, to end in failure, and Solid Snake's mission and how Venom was going to die in the end. Venom just carries it out like a loyal soldier. There's a lot of speculation about what this scene means and what the context of it is. Some think this is a time jump and that Venom is walking towards his battle with Solid Snake at the end. But Big Boss ages normally, and Venom hasn't aged a day here, so I think it's still 84. And that Big Boss outlined the full long-term plan. Outer Heaven was the trial run for Zanzibar Land 4 years later, and he used Venom to do the test. By 1995, Big Boss didn't have any use for him anymore and was ready to return as a mercenary leader, which is the note the Phantom Pain ends on, and effectively brings the series full circle because it's the final game in our timeline and takes place in 1984. By the end, we're set up for Solid Snake's first mission in 1995, and that is the note the Metal Gear Saga ended on. The ending was the final scandal of MGS5, as it completely changed almost everything we knew about Metal Gear lore. I'm of the mind that it's been 10 years. It is what happened. Big Boss had a weird body double thing going on, and that's that. The game was met with raving reviews like usual, but left fans feeling kinda unsatisfied with more questions than answers. Made them feel their own Phantom Pain at the end. Although now that it's done, that's the whole MGS timeline. I do think it's funny how I said I wanted this one to be short since the game has so much story underneath the surface, and yet this game got the most screen time of any of them. But that's just because of how much plot's in the background, and how complicated the ending is. I really didn't cover everything that's related to this game's story, but that's it for the Phantom Pain. A game that brings everything full circle, like I said, where we can look back on the saga and think it was ultimately a story about ego and legacy. Like Big Boss said in MGS4, it all started with a bunch of old fools. People trying to do the right thing and honor the boss, but ego and personality got in the way, and that almost ruined the world. And how, at the end of the day, Big Boss was never really the badass he has been portrayed as. He was a legendary and skilled soldier, but even his crowning mission, Operation Snake Eater, was guaranteed to succeed thanks to Skullface. When instead, his son, Solid Snake, is the true hero of heroes. The man who saved the world time and time again. The man who never questioned it or complained, he just got the job done. The man who would fall on the sword to let somebody else live. Big Boss was willing to let somebody else be him and fight his battles for him, but Solid Snake would never let that happen to Raiden, even being willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to save the world, something Big Boss would never have done. Big Boss even giving Snake the credit he's owed at the end of MGS4. And while that is it for the timeline, the video's not over yet because the Metal Gear series doesn't end with the Phantom Pain. Kojima and Konami parted ways once MGS5 was finished. MGS5 had post-launch support with both Metal Gear Online 3 and the FOB mode, but still the future was uncertain for the series. Especially once Konami just decided they were done with big-budget games and wanted to focus on mobile games and casino games like MGS3's Pachinko Machine, which teased us because we got to see MGS3 with these HD graphics. But it was only for a casino game, not a console MGS3 remake, because that would never happen, it seemed. But we did get one thing. In 2016, a new game was announced, Metal Gear Survive, a spin-off title with Survivor Tower Defense gameplay. This game couldn't have been announced at a worse time. To many, Hideo Kojima is the Metal Gear series, so your first game without him being a title that's Metal Gear in name only just seemed like a cash grab. Especially since those loyal to Kojima and the audience were still anti-Konami at the time for what happened, so this game was hit with a bunch of backlash from moment one. However, it did still hit store shelves in 2018. I've never played it. I heard it was not the worst thing ever, which isn't high praise, but it's what I heard. I was just never interested in it and never got around to it. Maybe someday, but who knows. There is a plot, though. Survivors of Mother Base and Ground Zeroes are pulled into a wormhole and must fight to survive the enemies you face off against. Now that sounds like a crazy reach, but technically wormholes do exist in MGS5, as you can upgrade your Fulton extraction and just be a fucking portal that pulls things away. But that's gameplay, not canon. So wormholes aren't really a thing in the Metal Gear universe, but there is an alternate ending to this game that implies the character you play as is one of the wandering MSF soldiers you rescue in the MGS5 side op where you recover lost MSF personnel running around the desert. This game being what they see, or something like that. If that was true, hallucinations aren't exactly canon, so Metal Gear Survive isn't canon, and it's a game people are mixed on, but it doesn't really matter. This era of the series being dead and only getting a weird game like this is over. It's not canon and doesn't have any bearing on the series today. That was 2018. The series being dead was something I and many fans just got used to as the franchise lived on in the hearts and minds of players everywhere via memes and thoughtful YouTube content. But in the early 2020s, something was seemingly shifting. Konami was making moves to preserve their gaming legacy. Classic titles from their back catalog were reaching new consoles, and they were even releasing a Capcom-styled modern remake of Silent Hill 2. Could this mean the Metal Gear series wasn't dead for good? Well, we started getting rumors of an MGS3 remake, but I dismissed those in my mind since fake leaks happen often. But I was proven wrong in June of 2023 as Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater was announced, a full remake of MGS3 for current platforms. It was set for release in 2024 but got delayed to 2025. But the hype didn't stop there. Shortly after, the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 was announced for PS4, PS5, Switch, Steam, Xbox One, and Series X. This was a huge collection that came with Metal Gear 1, Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid VR Missions, Metal Gear Solid Integral, Metal Gear Solid Special Missions, the HD editions of Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, the NES version of Metal Gear, Snake's Revenge, and the digital graphic novel adaptations of Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. Alongside screenplays for every game and a master lore book and factoids in the series. It was massive. It had issues at launch, but many of them have been fixed with patches because the team running the Metal Gear series at Konami do really seem to care about preserving the legacy of Metal Gear Solid and delivering good products. So while I was harsher on the Master Collection when it released, today I'm pretty pleased with it and would recommend it to anyone looking to get into the world of tactical espionage action. But then, of course, comes 2025 and Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. This is the newest Metal Gear Solid game, though I don't have a lot to say about it here. I just did a 25-minute video on the game a few weeks back. But when thinking about this video, there wasn't too much else to add. This was nothing like the Twin Snakes, which fully redubbed MGS1 and gave us new cutscenes to talk about. I think Delta is a much better game and remake than Twin Snakes, standing alongside the original MGS3 in quality, but it's so faithful in story and cutscenes since it uses the same audio and motion capture that there isn't really much else to add. If you remember how Snake Eater 3D was basically just what if MGS5 got put through the filter of Peace Walker, Delta is much the same. Delta is what if MGS3 got put through the filter of MGS5. MGS3D and Delta don't include mechanics from Peace Walker and MGS5 that would break MGS3, but enough for the game to feel fresh. It's a very enjoyable time if you like based stealth action gameplay. But there is one thing I'd like to mention. That would be when you defeat Colonel Volgin in Delta, his injuries with the bullets line up with how Volgin appears as the Man on Fire in the Phantom Pain. That's attention to detail I appreciate. Thumbs up for the devs on that. Because of that, you may even call Delta more canon than the original because of that, like that bit about the PSG-1 I was saying in Twin Snakes. But with that said, we've now fully caught up. I am now 100 pages into this script and we've come full circle. That is the complete history of the Metal Gear franchise alongside a breakdown in the lore. I had a lot of fun doing this one, and I'm glad I did and closed out the Metal Gear Revisited series with this project. Some might wonder why this series that has offered criticism on the MGS saga would end with this huge celebration of the entire franchise, and I can answer that simply. It's because, sure, I've played MGS 1 and 2 and all that enough times to have issues with them, but that's because I actually do love the series. You don't get that invested in something you don't care about. Yeah, I reached a point with these games that I didn't see them in the same joyous light that I used to, but that never erased their impact on my life, and that never erased the knowledge of the series and its lore from my brain. Since this is probably the last time I'm going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid on my channel, I wanted to go out with a big bang that shows how much this series has meant to me in my time on YouTube, but also my life. Yeah, I do have nitpicks and issues with every game. I might not think MGS2 is as much of a masterpiece as it's touted, but I'm still going to keep replaying and thinking about these games in the future, but since I do love basically all of them. And I never really said anything to the contrary. Metal Gear is a special franchise, there's nothing quite like it, and I think the future is actually pretty bright for MGS. I can't wait to see what's included in the Master Collection Volume 2 and what games they bring us next. Which I think is an appropriate spot to end the video on, so I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.